Amelia Carter dropped to her knees in the cold Kansas mud and clutched her dead mother's quilt to her chest as two men hurled the last of her belongings into the street. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "This is my home." The banker didn't even look at her. He just nailed the notice to the door and said loud enough for the whole town to hear, "Was your home, Miss Carter? A woman like you. You should have married while somebody'd still take you." And every neighbor she had ever known simply turned and walked away. If a story like Amelia's touches your heart, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because I promise you, it changes everything. And do me one small favor, leave a comment telling me what city or town you're watching from tonight, so I can see just how far Amelia's story has traveled. Now let's begin. The notice was still swinging on its nail when the crowd began to thin. Amelia stayed on her knees. She did not have the strength to stand, and even if she had, she did not know where she would go once she did. The mud soaked through her skirt and into her skin, and the December air bit at her cheeks, but she barely felt it. She felt only the quilt in her arms, the last thing her mother had ever made, and the sound of her father's front door being locked against her forever. "Get up, girl. You're making a spectacle." The voice belonged to Mrs. Prudence Halloway, who owned the dry goods store and had known Amelia since she was a baby. There had been a time years ago when Mrs. Halloway had slipped her peppermints across the counter and called her a sweet little thing. That time was long gone. "Mrs. Halloway," Amelia said, looking up, "you knew my father. You knew he'd have paid every cent if the fever hadn't taken him first. Please, if someone would just speak for me at the bank, speak for you." Mrs. Halloway pulled her shawl tighter as if Amelia's misfortune were catching. "And what would I say exactly? That the Carter girl's a fine, hard-working Christian woman. Anybody with eyes can see what you are, Amelia. You're a burden. You have been since your poor mama passed. Your father worked himself into the grave keeping you fed." The words landed like stones. "That's not true," Amelia whispered. "Ain't it?" The older woman sniffed. "A pretty girl, a thin girl, she finds a husband. She gets herself looked after. But you sat in that house and let your daddy carry you, and now he's gone, and there's nobody left to do the carrying. That's the plain truth, and somebody ought to say it to your face, instead of behind your back like the rest of them." Amelia looked past her at the rest of them, the neighbors gathered in doorways and along the boardwalk, watching a young woman kneel in the mud outside her own lost home. Not one of them stepped forward. Not the Pattersons, whose barn her father had helped raise. Not old Doc Whitfield, whose fence her father had mended without ever sending a bill. They watched and they whispered and they waited to see what she would do. She got up. It took everything she had, but she got up. She stood in the ruined street with her mother's quilt clutched against her, and she made herself look at each of them one by one until they dropped their eyes. "My father," she said, and her voice did not shake, "was the finest man in this town, and every single one of you knew it. He never once asked what a person weighed before he decided whether they were worth helping." Nobody answered her. She bent slowly and gathered what she could carry. The quilt, a small carpet bag of clothes, her mother's Bible, a tin box of letters. The rest they could keep. Let them auction it. Let them pick over a dead man's chairs and a dead woman's dishes like crows over a field. She would not stay to watch. "Where'll you even go?" a young voice called out. It was Betsy Patterson, 16, and cruel in the careless way that only the young and untroubled can be. "Ain't nobody in Cedar Valley gonna take you and Amelia, not looking like that." "Betsy," someone hissed, but it was a half-hearted scolding, the kind meant more to spare the scolder's conscience than to defend the girl in the street. Amelia turned toward Betsy, and for one long moment, the two of them simply looked at each other. Then Amelia said quietly, "One day, Betsy Patterson life is going to knock you flat. I pray to God that when it does, somebody kinder than this town shows up to lift you back up." She walked away before the girl could answer. She walked the length of the main road with her chin up and her eyes forward, though everything in her wanted to break. She heard the whispers trail behind her like smoke. Poor thing always was too big. No wonder such a shame. Her father should have done better by her. She heard a man laugh. She did not turn around. At the edge of town where the road forked toward the cemetery, she finally stopped. And there alone with no one watching, Amelia Carter let herself weep. She wept for her father 3 weeks in the ground, and already forgotten by the men who had drunk his whiskey and eaten at his table. She wept for her mother, gone 6 years now, who had told her 100 times that her worth would never be measured by the width of her waist. She wept for the girl she had been, who had believed it. Then she wiped her face on her sleeve, and she walked to her father's grave. The mound was still raw, not yet grown over. Someone she never learned who had set a plain wooden cross at the head of it. She knelt in front of it, and this time the cold did not touch her at all. "Well, Papa," she said, "they took the house." The wind moved through the bare trees. She had not expected an answer, and she did not get one, but somehow speaking to him steadied her all the same. "You always said I was smart. You said I could do sums faster than any man at the bank, and you were right, I could. You said I read more books than the schoolmaster." She let out a small, broken laugh. "Lot of good it does me now. Turns out nobody wants a woman who can do sums, Papa. They want a woman who's easy to look at, and I never learned how to be that. I don't reckon I ever will." She traced her fingers over the letters carved into the cross. "James Carter, I'm scared," she admitted, and it was the first time she had said the words out loud to anyone. "I don't know what happens to a woman like me. I've got $11 and a bag of clothes and no one in this whole world who wants me. And I keep thinking the town's right. Maybe I am a burden. Maybe I should just take whatever's offered and be grateful, even if it's nothing." The wind died down, and in the sudden quiet, Amelia heard her mother's voice as clearly as if she were kneeling in the dirt beside her. "You listen to me, child. Your worth is not for other people to decide. It's yours. It always was. Don't you ever let a soul convince you otherwise." Amelia closed her eyes. When she opened them, something in her had changed. It was not hope exactly. She was too tired for hope. It was closer to defiance. A hard, stubborn ember that refused to go out, no matter how much cold water the world poured on it. "All right, Papa," she whispered. "All right. I hear you, Mama. I'm not gonna beg. I'm not gonna wait around this town for somebody to take pity on me. I'll find my own way, or I'll die trying. But I will not let them decide what I'm worth." She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and left the cemetery without looking back. The only person in Cedar Valley who would take her in was Sarah Beaumont, the widowed washerwoman who lived in a 2-room shack down by the creek, and whom the town regarded as barely a step above Amelia herself. Sarah had lost her husband to the same fever that had taken half the county, and she made her living scrubbing other people's linens for pennies. When Amelia knocked on her door that night, soaked and shivering, Sarah took one look at her and pulled her inside without a word of hesitation. "Sit down by the fire before you catch your death," Sarah said. She was a small, weathered woman of perhaps 50, with hands cracked from lye soap and eyes that had seen a great deal of sorrow and refused to be hardened by it. "I got soup. Ain't much, but it's hot." "I can't pay you," Amelia said. "I've only got—" "Did I ask you for money?" Sarah set a bowl in her hands. "Eat." Amelia ate, and when she was done, she began to cry again, and Sarah sat beside her and let her one rough hand rubbing slow circles on her back. "They threw my father's things in the street," Amelia said. "Prescott from the bank, he said I should have married while somebody'd still take me, in front of everyone." "Nathaniel Prescott," Sarah said, and the name came out like something spat, "is a small man with a small soul, and he has been since he was a boy. Don't you carry one word of his in your heart. Not one. Mrs. Halloway said I'm a burden. She said Papa worked himself to death keeping me fed." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said gently but firmly, "Your daddy loved you more than his own life, Amelia Carter. I knew James near 30 years, and not one time did I ever hear that man call you anything but his greatest blessing." Now Prudence Holloway can say whatever she likes. But don't you dare put her lies in your father's mouth. He wouldn't stand for it, and I won't either." Amelia wept harder then, but it was a different kind of weeping. The kind that comes not from being broken, but from being finally believed. She stayed with Sarah for 3 weeks. She earned her keep. She would not do otherwise. She scrubbed and wrung and hauled water until her own hands cracked, and she learned that Sarah, for all her poverty, was one of the wealthiest people she had ever known. Wealthy in the things that mattered, in kindness and in courage, and in the refusal to let cruelty pass through her without protest. But 3 weeks was long enough for Amelia to understand a hard truth: there was no future for her in Cedar Valley. The town had made its judgment. No respectable family would hire her. No shop would take her on. The best she could hope for was to grow old beside Sarah, scrubbing other people's shirts until her own back gave out. And she loved Sarah far too much to become another mouth for that good woman to feed. She would have to leave. The question was where, and how, and to what. Chapter. It was Sarah in the end who put the answer in front of her, though neither of them knew it at the time. Sarah collected old newspapers from the households she washed for. She used them to line drawers and start fires and stuff into the cracks in the walls against the winter draft. One evening, sorting through a bundle of them by lamplight, Amelia's eye caught on a page from a Missouri paper, weeks out of date, in a column of advertisements. Most of them were the usual sort: men seeking wives the way men out west had always done, there being far more men than women on the frontier. Amelia had seen such notices before and thought little of them. They were mostly the same. Man of good standing seeks young lady of fair appearance and gentle temperament. Always fair appearance, always young, always the same list of demands dressed up in polite language, and always somewhere in the fine print the same message: tell me what I want to hear, and be pretty while you do it. But one notice was different. She read it twice before she understood why it had stopped her. Wanted a woman willing to build a life as a partner, not someone looking for a fantasy. I am a rancher, 35 years widower, of comfortable means. I will not pretend the life is easy. It is not. I do not want a wife who expects to be rescued, nor one who expects me to be perfect. I want a partner. If you are honest and willing to work and tired of being told what you are worth by people who never bothered to know you, write to me. William Hayes, Broken River Ranch, Montana Territory. Amelia sat very still for a long time. Tired of being told what you are worth by people who never bothered to know you. It was as if the man had reached across 1,000 miles and a dozen weeks and spoken directly into the wound the town had left in her. "What is it?" Sarah asked, noticing her stillness. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Amelia read the notice aloud. When she finished, Sarah did not laugh the way Amelia had half expected. She did not scoff or warn or fret. She only looked at Amelia for a long measuring moment, and then she said quietly, "You want my honest opinion, or you want me to tell you what a proper woman's supposed to say?" "Your honest opinion. Always." Sarah set down the shirt she'd been mending. "I've been poor my whole life, Amelia, and being poor teaches you one thing above all others. Chances don't come often, and when they don't come dressed up nice. They come frightening. They come with no promises, and most folks let 'em pass by because taking 'em means being brave, and being brave is the hardest thing there is." She nodded toward the paper in Amelia's hands. "That there is a chance. It might be a good one. It might be a terrible one. I can't tell you which, but I can tell you that if you stay here scrubbing shirts with me till you're old and gray, you'll always wonder. And wonderin' is its own kind of prison." "He's a stranger," Amelia said. "I don't know a thing about him." "You didn't know a thing about me 3 weeks ago either. And here you sit." Amelia looked down at the notice again. "Everyone would say I'm foolish," she said. "Marrying a man I've never met. Traveling halfway across the country to a place I've never seen. They'd say I'm only doing it because nobody here would have me." "And what would you say?" Sarah asked. It was the same question in its way that would one day be put to her by the man himself, though of course she could not have known that yet. And she found sitting there in the lamplight that she already knew the answer. "I'd say," Amelia answered slowly, "that I'm not running away from anything. I'd say I'm running towards something. There's a difference, isn't there? Sarah smiled a rare, whole smile that crinkled every line in her face. There surely is, child. There surely is. That's high. Amelia did not write the letter that night. She was not reckless, whatever the town might have believed. She thought about it for 4 days. She thought about it while she scrubbed, and while she hauled water, and while she lay awake on Sarah's spare cot, listening to the creek run past in the dark. She turned it over and over in her mind, examining it from every angle, looking for the trap in it. Men could be cruel. Men could be liars. A woman alone in the world had to be careful, and a woman alone and unlovely in the eyes of the world had to be more careful still, for she made an easy target. But she kept coming back to the words. I do not want a wife who expects to be rescued. No man looking to prey on a desperate woman would write that. A predator wanted a woman who needed rescuing, who would be grateful and compliant and afraid to leave. This man was asking for the opposite. He was asking for a partner who would stand on her own 2 feet. And there was something else in the notice, something she almost missed. The tone of it was not the tone of a man puffed up with his own importance. It was the tone of a man who was lonely and tired and honest about both. I do not want one who expects me to be perfect. A man did not write those words unless he had been made to feel at some point that he had failed to be enough. He's wounded too, Amelia thought. Whatever happened to him, it left a mark. Same as this town left one on me. On the 5th day, she borrowed paper and ink from Sarah, and she sat down at the small table by the window, and she began to write. She did not write what she thought he wanted to hear. She had spent her whole life watching other women do that, perform and flatter and shrink themselves to fit inside a man's expectations, and it had never once made her happy, nor had it ever in the end saved a single one of them. So she wrote the truth instead. Mr. Hayes, she began. My name is Amelia Carter. I am 24 years old, from Cedar Valley, Kansas. Before I answer your advertisement, I believe you deserve to know exactly who it is that's writing to you, so that you can decide plainly and not be deceived. I have never managed a ranch. I do not know the first thing about cattle. I am a passable cook, but no better than that, and I will not pretend otherwise. I have never lived anywhere but the town I was born in, and the thought of leaving it frightens me more than I can say. I am also, as folks here would be quick to tell you, not a small woman. I say this not to trouble you, but because I have learned that men are seldom honest about such things when it matters, and I would rather you know now from my own hand than be surprised later and feel cheated. If a woman's figure is the most important thing to you in a wife, then I am not your woman, and I wish you every happiness in finding her. She paused there, her pen hovering over the page. This was the moment where every instinct born of a lifetime in Cedar Valley told her to soften it, to apologize, to make herself smaller. She set her jaw and pressed on. But here is what I can tell you that is true, and that I am not ashamed of. I know how to work. I have never in my life been afraid of hard labor, and I am not afraid of it now. I know how to learn, and I learned quickly. My father, God rest him, taught me my letters and my sums, and I can keep an account book better than most men who do it for a living. I know how to keep my word, and I know I have only lately come to know it, and it cost me a great deal that I deserve to be valued for more than the shape of my body. You wrote that you wanted a partner, and not someone looking to be rescued. Mr. Hayes, I do not want to be rescued. I have been rescued by no one my whole life, and I have survived all the same. What I want is a place to build something beside someone who will not measure my worth with his eyes before he has bothered to know my heart. I do not know if that is you. I cannot know it from a notice in a newspaper. But your words did not sound like the words of the men I have known. And so I am taking a chance and writing to you, though everyone I know would call me a fool for it. If you would like to know more of me, I will tell you anything you ask honestly. And if you have read this far, and decided I am not what you're looking for, I will understand, and I will hold no bitterness. I have had a good deal of practice at being passed over. Respectfully, yours, Amelia Carter. She read it over 3 times. Twice she nearly tore it up. The honesty of it terrified her. She had handed this stranger every weapon he might use to wound her, laid out all her tenderest places, like a hand of cards, face up on the table. But that, she decided, was exactly the point. She was done shrinking. She was done performing. If this man could not bear the truth of her, then he was not worth the journey, and she would rather know it now than travel 1,000 miles to find it out. She folded the letter, addressed it, and the next morning she walked into town, head high, ignoring the whispers, and mailed it with her own money at the post office, where the clerk looked at the Montana address, and then at her, and smirked. "Writin' to a rancher, Miss Carter," he said. "One of them mail-order arrangements? Well," he clucked his tongue, "I suppose a woman in your situation can't be choosy." Amelia leaned on the counter and looked him dead in the eye. "You know what, Mr. Fenwick? You're right. I can't be choosy." She smiled at him, sweet as pie. "Which is a mercy for you, because if I could be, I'd have quite a lot to say about a grown man who spends his days sneering at women who've done him no harm. Good day." She walked out before he could recover, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt something almost like herself again. Then came the waiting. It was in some ways the hardest part of all. Montana was far, and the mails were slow, and a letter might take 2 weeks to reach Broken River Ranch, and 2 weeks to return, if it returned at all. Amelia told herself not to hope. She had learned painfully what hoping cost. She threw herself into her work with Sarah and tried to think of it no more. She thought of it constantly. Every day she walked into town on some errand, real or invented, and every day she stopped at the post office, and every day Mr. Fenwick told her with entirely too much satisfaction that there was nothing. A week passed, then 10 days, then 2 weeks. The hard little ember of hope she had guarded so carefully began, despite all her efforts, to flicker and dim. He read it. She told Sarah one night, staring into the fire. He read it, and he saw exactly what everyone here sees, and he threw it in the stove. That's what happened. I let myself be honest, and honesty got me the same thing it always gets a woman like me: nothing. Or, Sarah said mildly, not looking up from her mending, the mail is slow, and Montana is far, and a rancher in December has 100 things to tend to before he sits down to answer his correspondence. You always did have a gift for imagining the worst, child. It's not imagining the worst if the worst is what always happens. Sarah did look up then. "The worst didn't happen when you knocked on my door," she said quietly. "Did it?" Amelia had no answer for that. The letter came on the 19th day. Mr. Fenwick's face when he handed it to her was almost comical. In its disappointment, he had clearly been looking forward to informing her once again that no one had written. Instead, he had to pass across the counter a travel-worn envelope postmarked Montana Territory, addressed in a strong, plain, unmistakably masculine hand to Miss Amelia Carter, Cedar Valley, Kansas. Amelia's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She did not open it in the post office. She would not give Fenwick the satisfaction of watching her face. She walked all the way back to Sarah's shack, the letter burning in her pocket the whole way, and she sat down at the little table by the window, and only then, with Sarah watching from across the room, did she break the seal. "Miss Carter," it began, "I have read your letter 3 times, which is 3 times more than I have read any of the others. I will be plain with you, as you were plain with me, because I believe I owe you that much, and because plainness is the only thing I have ever had much use for. I received near 40 letters after that notice ran. 39 of them told me what a fine wife the writer would make. 39 of them promised me they were beautiful and cheerful, and would keep a perfect house, and would never give me a moment's trouble. I did not believe a word of any of them. A person who promises you they have no faults is either lying to you or lying to themselves, and I have had my fill of both. Yours was the 40th. And yours was the only one that told me a single true thing about yourself. You told me what you cannot do. You told me what you are afraid of. You told me God help me about your own figure, which no woman has ever in my life had the plain courage to do, as though I were the sort of man who'd hold it against you. Miss Carter, I want to tell you something, and I want you to believe it. Though I know a woman who has been treated as you have been treated may find it hard. I do not give one good damn what you look like." Amelia's breath caught. Across the room, Sarah said, "Well, what's he say?" But Amelia could not answer. She read on. "I buried a wife who was by the reckoning of everyone who ever laid eyes on her a beautiful woman. Catherine. She was beautiful and she was charming, and she could light up a room, and everyone in the territory told me what a lucky man I was. I will not speak ill of the dead. But I will tell you that beauty kept me no company on the long nights, and charm did not stand beside me through the hard winters, and being the envy of every man in the county did not make me one bit less alone in my own house. I loved her in my way, and I grieved her when the fever took her. But I learned too late that I had married a face, and that a face is a cold thing to grow old beside. So you will forgive me if a woman who cannot cook and is afraid of the journey, and had the raw honesty to tell me so, interests me a great deal more than 39 promises of perfection. Now, I will not deceive you either, since you have set the terms of this, and I mean to meet them. The life here is hard. I did not exaggerate that. The winters will try you in ways you cannot imagine, sitting in a warm kitchen in Kansas. The nearest neighbor is 4 miles off. The nearest town is 11. There will be days you are lonesome enough to weep, and I will not always know how to comfort you, because I am not. And I say this as a warning, not an excuse, a man who finds it easy to speak what's in his heart. I have been told I am a hard man to know. I expect it's true. Marriage will not fix what is broken in either of us. I have no illusions on that score, and I would not have you hold any. But I have thought a great deal since your letter came, and here is where I have landed, and I will set it down plain. I do not need someone to complete my life. I have a ranch and cattle and land, and by the standards of this territory, I want for nothing. What I need, what I have come at last to understand I need, is someone willing to build one beside me. Not to save me, not to be saved by me, to stand beside me and build. You wrote that you want a place to build something beside someone who will not measure your worth with his eyes before he has bothered to know your heart. Miss Carter, I should like very much to know your heart. If you are willing, I will send the fare for your passage west. There will be no obligation in it. If you come, and you look at me, and you look at this life, and you decide it is not for you, then I will pay your fare home again, and wish you well, and think no less of you. I will not trap a woman into anything. You came into this world free, whatever that town of yours has tried to tell you, and you will remain so. But I hope you will come. Yours, William Hayes. Amelia realized she was crying only when a tear fell onto the page and blurred the ink. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and read the last lines again. I should like very much to know your heart. No one had ever in her entire life said such a thing to her. Amelia. Sarah had crossed the room and was standing over her, now one worn hand on her shoulder. Child, you're frightening me. Is it bad? What's he written? Amelia looked up at her, tears streaming, and she laughed a wet, disbelieving, joyful laugh. He wants to know my heart, she said. Sarah. He read my letter 3 times. He said he doesn't give a damn what I look like. He said, her voice broke. He said I came into this world free, and I'll remain so. Sarah read the letter herself slowly, her lips moving over the words. When she finished, she sat down heavily on the bench and let out a long breath. Well, she said. Well now. She wiped her own eyes with the back of her hand and pretended she hadn't. I've read a good many letters in my time from a good many men, and I'll tell you, Amelia Carter, most of 'em ain't worth the paper. But that, she tapped the page, that was written by a decent man. I'd stake my life on it. That is a man who has suffered and learned something from the sufferin' instead of letting it turn him mean. There ain't many of those in this world. Believe me, I've looked. You think I should go? Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed softer and full of something that might have been the memory of her own long-ago choices. I think, she said, that a chance like this comes to a woman maybe once in her life if she's lucky, and to most women never at all. I think that man is offering you the one thing this town spent your whole life taking from you. He's offering to see you. Not your face, not your figure. You. She reached over and took Amelia's hand in both of her cracked, gentle ones. And I think if you let fear talk you out of it, you'll spend the rest of your days scrubbing shirts beside me and wondering what you might have been. And I love you far too well to let that happen without saying my piece. Amelia looked down at their joined hands. I'm scared, she whispered. What if I get there and he takes one look and changes his mind? What if he's just like all the rest and only thinks he isn't? What if I travel 1,000 miles just to be thrown out into the street all over again? Only this time, there's no one, there's no you to open the door. Then you'll take the fare home he promised, and you'll come right back here, and I'll have the soup hot, Sarah said. But Amelia, listen to me now. She squeezed her hand. That fear you're feeling, that ain't the fear of a bad decision. I know the difference. I've made enough of both kinds. That's the fear of a good decision. The fear of wanting something so bad it terrifies you because if you reach for it and lose it, it'll hurt worse than never reaching at all. That's not a reason to run, child. That's the surest sign there is that you found something worth reaching for. They sat together in the lamplight for a long time. And then Amelia Carter wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders and said in a voice that did not shake, I'm going to Montana. She wrote back that very night. She told William Hayes yes. She told him she would come, and she thanked him for the fare, and she told him, because she had decided she would never again be anything but honest with this man, that she was terrified, and that she was coming anyway, and that she supposed those two things could be true at once. You wrote that marriage would not fix what's broken in either of us, she wrote. I believe you. But I have been thinking, Mr. Hayes, that perhaps two broken people set side by side and willing to work might build something sturdier than either could alone. A wall built of whole bricks is fine, but my father used to say the strongest walls he ever built used the cracked ones too, set careful and mortared right. I do not know if that is true of people. I should like to find out. I will come as soon as the fare arrives, and I will look at you and at your life honestly the way you asked. But I will tell you now, so you are not surprised, I do not think I will want to go home again. I do not think I ever really had one until a stranger in Montana offered to help me build it. The fare came 11 days later, wrapped in a short note that said only, Come safe. W.H. Amelia held those 3 words for a long while. There was, she thought, a whole man in them, a man who felt a great deal and said very little, who had reached across 1,000 miles the only way he knew how, in 3 plain words that cost him more than a whole page might cost another. The night before she left, Sarah pressed the mended quilt into her arms. Amelia's mother's quilt, which Sarah had quietly repaired in the evenings, patching the torn corner where it had dragged through the mud outside the lost house. Can't have you go into your new life dragging a broken quilt, Sarah said gruffly. There, good as it'll ever be. Better maybe. Some things are stronger where they've been mended. Amelia embraced her, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, that they might never see each other again. That 1,000 miles was a very long way, that this good woman who had opened her door on the worst night of Amelia's life had become in 3 short weeks more of a mother to her than the whole town of Cedar Valley had ever managed to be. I don't know how to thank you, Amelia whispered. You go and you build that life, Sarah said fiercely. You go and you be happy, and you don't let one soul out there make you feel small ever again. That's how you thank me. You hear? I hear you. And you write to me, every month. I'll have Fenwick's boy read 'em to me, and I'll dictate back, and I'll tell you all the town gossip and how sorry every one of 'em is gonna be when they find out the woman nobody wanted went and made herself a fine life out west. Sarah's voice cracked at last. Now go on. Get some sleep. You got a long road tomorrow. Amelia did not sleep much. She lay on the cot and listened to the creek and thought about all the miles between the girl weeping in the mud 3 weeks ago and the woman who would board a train in the morning. She was not the same person. She would never be that person again. The town had tried to break her, and instead it had only stripped away everything that was not truly hers, every hope of their approval, every scrap of her old belief that she must earn her right to exist by being smaller, quieter, less. All of it gone. And what was left when all of that was burned away turned out to be steel. In the morning, she boarded the train. The whole town, it seemed, found some reason to be near the depot to watch her go. Pretending errands gathered in knots on the platform, come to see the spectacle of the Carter girl, running off to marry a stranger. Mrs. Halloway was there. So was young Betsy Patterson. So, God help him, was Nathaniel Prescott from the bank, who tipped his hat to her with a smirk and said loud enough to be heard, "Well, Miss Carter, off to Montana, I hear. I do hope this rancher of yours knows what he's gettin'. Though I don't suppose a man that desperate can afford to be particular any more than you can." The old Amelia would have looked at the ground. The old Amelia would have hurried past. This Amelia turned one foot on the train's iron step and looked Nathaniel Prescott full in the face and spoke in a clear, carrying voice that reached every last soul on that platform. "Mr. Prescott, you threw my father's things into the street and you told me I was worthless, and this whole town stood by and agreed with you." She let that hang a moment in the cold morning air, watching them all shift and look away. "And you know what I've learned since a man who has to make a woman feel small to feel big himself is the smallest man there is. My father was worth 10 of you, and the stranger, I'm going to meet a man I've never laid eyes on, has already shown me more kindness in 3 letters than this entire town showed me in 24 years. She looked past Prescott at all of them, at Mrs. Halloway and Betsy and the Pattersons and the whole watching crowd. "I hope you all sleep fine tonight. I truly do. And I hope someday somebody shows every one of you the mercy you never once showed me." She stepped up into the train. The conductor, an older man who had watched the whole exchange, touched his cap to her, a real gesture. This one, not a mocking one, and said quietly, "Ma'am," and helped her aboard. She found a seat by the window. She did not look out at the platform. She looked forward down the length of the car, toward the front of the train, toward the west. The whistle blew. The wheels groaned and began to turn. And Amelia Carter left Cedar Valley, Kansas, and everyone in it, and did not shed a single tear. The tears came later, somewhere in the empty stretch of prairie between Kansas and the rest of her life, quiet ones, not bitter. She was thinking of Sarah. She was thinking of her father and how he would have stood on that platform and put his arm around her and told the whole town to go hang. She was thinking of her mother's voice. "Your worth is not for other people to decide. It's yours. It always was." "I know, Mama," she whispered to the window glass, to the miles of grass rolling past. "I know it now." The journey west was long, and it was not without its trials. A woman traveling alone drew attention, and not all of it kind. On the second day, a stout traveling salesman in a checked suit took the seat across from her uninvited and looked her over with an expression she knew far too well. "Now what's a girl like you doing traveling all alone?" he said in the oily tone of a man who believed his own charm. "Dangerous a woman by herself. You want somebody to look after you." "I'm going to be married," Amelia said, not looking up from her mother's Bible. "Married?" The man laughed. "To who out here? Some desperate sodbuster who couldn't get himself a proper—" He stopped, perhaps thinking better of it, and changed tack. "I only mean a big handsome gal like yourself. You could do better than to throw yourself away on the first man that'd—" "Sir." Amelia closed the Bible and looked at him directly. "In the last month I have been thrown out of my home, insulted by my whole town, and told 100 different ways that I am worthless. So I want you to understand that there is truly nothing you can say to me that I have not already heard from crueler mouths than yours. You are wasting your breath, and you are in my late father's seat. I've decided that's his seat, so I would take it kindly if you'd move along." The salesman stared at her, opened his mouth, shut it, and moved along. An older woman 2 rows back, who had heard the whole thing, caught Amelia's eye and gave her a small approving nod. Later she moved up to sit beside her, and it turned out her name was Mrs. Eleanor Grace, and she was traveling to Denver to live with her son, and she had buried a husband and raised 4 children, and had exactly no patience left for foolish men. The 2 of them talked for hours. "Marrying a man you've never met? Mrs. Grace mused when Amelia told her story. My mother did the same, you know. Came over from Ireland to marry a man she knew only from letters. Everyone told her she was mad. Was she happy? Amelia asked. 41 years they had, Mrs. Grace said. He worshipped the ground she walked on. When he passed, she said she'd not have traded one day of it, mad or not. She patted Amelia's hand. You know what I think, dear? I think the folks who never risk anything are the ones who end up with the least. It's a hard truth, but it's a true one. She smiled. This rancher of yours, the honest one who wants to know your heart. I think you've made a braver choice than any of those people on that platform ever made in their whole soft lives. And I think it's going to turn out better than a single one of them can imagine. Amelia held on to those words through the rest of the long journey, through the days of clattering rails and cold depot platforms, through the changes of train, and the endless rolling miles as Kansas gave way to open country, and open country gave way at last to the great mountains of the Montana Territory, rising blue and enormous against the sky. And with every mile the fear did not lessen. She had stopped expecting it to, but it changed. It stopped being the fear of a woman running from something, and became the fear of a woman running toward something so wanted, so long denied, so nearly impossible to believe in, that reaching for it felt like reaching for a light. She had been told all her life she had no right to hold. She did not know what waited for her at the end of the line. She did not know if William Hayes would be kind in person, or cruel, gentle, or hard. Everything his letters promised, or nothing at all. She did not know if she would find a home at Broken River Ranch, or only one more door slammed shut. But she knew as the train carried her deeper into the mountains, and closer to the man, and the life she had chosen with her own two hands, that whatever waited for her there, she had already won the only victory that had ever truly mattered. She had stopped letting other people decide what she was worth. The rest, whatever it was, she would meet standing on her own 2 feet, with her mother's mended quilt in her arms, and her chin held high. And somewhere ahead past the mountains in a lonely house on a hard and beautiful stretch of land, a man who had buried one wife and learned all the wrong things too late was mending a fence and glancing every little while toward the road, and wondering with a nervousness that would have astonished every neighbor who thought they knew him, whether the woman whose honest letters he had read until the paper wore soft would truly come. She was coming. She was closer with every turn of the wheels. The train hissed and shuddered to a stop at the small Montana depot, and Amelia Carter's heart nearly stopped with it. She stayed frozen in her seat for a long moment, her mother's mended quilt clutched against her chest, watching the other passengers rise and gather their things. Mrs. Eleanor Grace, 2 seats over, had already reached the aisle. The older woman turned back and saw the terror plain on Amelia's face. He's out there, Mrs. Grace said gently. Isn't he? I don't know, Amelia whispered. What if he isn't? What if he looked at the calendar and thought better of the whole thing, and there's nobody on that platform at all? Then you'll have your fare home, and you'll come find me in Denver, and we'll figure out the rest. Mrs. Grace held out one gloved hand. But you'll never know sittin' here, child. Stand up. Come on, stand up and go find out. Amelia took the woman's hand, and she stood. Her legs did not want to hold her. 4 days of rails and cold depots and cruel salesmen, and now at the very end of it, the thing she had traveled 1,000 miles to face was on the other side of a train door, and she found she would have given anything to turn around. She thought of Sarah's soup. She thought of the creek running past the little shack. She thought for one wild instant of simply staying on the train and riding it clear to the Pacific and never getting off at all. Then she thought of the platform in Cedar Valley and Nathaniel Prescott tipping his hat and the whole town watching her go, certain she would come crawling back. I will not, she told herself. I will not come crawling back to those people for anything on God's earth. She squared her shoulders and she stepped down off the train. The platform was smaller than the one she had left, just a rough wooden thing beside a squat depot building with the enormous blue mountains rising behind it. A handful of people milled about. A rancher loading feed sacks. A woman greeting her husband. A boy with a dog. Amelia's eyes moved over them one by one, her heart hammering, looking for a man of 35, a widower, a stranger whose handwriting she knew better than his face. She did not see him. The train whistle blew behind her. Passengers who had gotten off to stretch climbed back aboard. Mrs. Grace at the far end of the platform was being embraced by a young man who must have been her son, and she caught Amelia's eye over his shoulder with a look of anxious question. Amelia gave a small shake of her head. "Not yet. I don't see him yet." The train began to move. And still there was no one. The old fear rose up in her throat like cold water. "He's not here. Of course he's not here. You let yourself believe, you let yourself hope, and here it is again, the same as always. You are the woman nobody comes for." She stood clutching her quilt and her carpet bag, and she felt the whole 4 days' journey and the whole terrible month before it come crashing down on her at once, and she thought she might simply sit down on the platform and not get up. "Miss Carter." The voice came from behind her, low and rough and uncertain, and she spun around. He was standing at the edge of the platform, a good 10 feet off, holding his hat in both hands in front of him, the way a man holds his hat at a funeral. He was tall, taller than she'd pictured, and broad through the shoulders, with a weathered sun-dark face and a short beard going gray at the edges and a pair of eyes that were at this moment fixed on her with an expression she could not read at all. Amelia's breath caught. "Mr. Hayes." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't move any closer. He turned the hat once in his hands a nervous quarter turn, and Amelia realized with a jolt that this man, this rancher, this widower who owned land and cattle and wanted for nothing, was as frightened as she was. Maybe more. He cleared his throat. "I was standing back by the depot. I didn't want to crowd you coming off the train. I figured you'd have enough to fret over without a stranger looming over you first thing." He turned the hat again. "I've been standing there since noon. Train was late." "You've been here since noon," Amelia repeated. "It's near 3. "Yes, ma'am." A pause. "I didn't want to miss it." Something in Amelia's chest, some hard clenched thing that had been clenched for a month, loosened just slightly. He had been there since noon. He had stood back by the depot for 3 hours, not to make a grand entrance, not to look her over as she stepped down, but because he did not want to crowd a frightened woman coming off a long journey. Nathaniel Prescott would never in his life have thought of such a thing. Neither would any man in Cedar Valley. "You must be tired," William said when she didn't speak. "It's a long way. He stopped and seemed to gather himself, and then said in a rush, as though he'd rehearsed it and needed to get it out before his nerve failed, "Miss Carter, before we go one step further, I want to say something, and I want you to hear it plain. You came a long way on the strength of 3 letters from a stranger, and that took more courage than most folks have got. Whatever happens from here, whatever you decide when you've seen the place and seen me proper, I want you to know I know what it cost you to come, and His voice roughened. "I'm glad you did." Amelia stared at him. 4 days on a train, a month of cruelty before it, a lifetime before that of being looked at and found wanting. And now a rough, gray-bearded stranger stood 10 feet off, holding his hat like a schoolboy, telling her that he knew what it had cost her to come. She had promised herself she would not cry. She cried anyway. "Oh, now!" William took a step forward, alarmed, then stopped himself clearly, unsure whether he had the right. "Miss Carter, I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong? I'm no good at this. I told you in my letter, I'm a hard man to know I don't." "No." Amelia wiped her face with the back of her hand and laughed a wet, broken laugh. "No, you didn't say anything wrong. You said—" She shook her head. "Mr. Hayes, in the last month you are the first person besides one old washerwoman who has said a single kind thing to me. And you said it standing on a train platform holding your hat like you're afraid of me. And I don't know what to do with that. I've forgotten how to be treated gentle. I'm sorry. Give me a moment." William Hayes stood very still and let her have her moment. He did not fill the silence with talk. He did not tell her to stop crying or that everything was fine, or any of the useless things people said. He just stood there hat in hands and waited, and there was in his stillness a kind of respect that Amelia felt more than saw. When she had collected herself, he said quietly, I've got a wagon out front. And I've got a room made up for you at the ranch, your own room. I want to be clear on that, ma'am. I'm not expecting anything. You'll stay in your own room, and we'll take whatever time you need. And if you decide this life ain't for you, I'll drive you back to this very platform myself and pay your fare home. Nothing's decided today, except that you're here, and you're worn out, and you ought to have a hot meal and a night's sleep before you decide one blessed thing. He hesitated. That suits you. Yes, Amelia said. Yes, that suits me fine. He reached for her carpet bag. She let him take it. And then, after a moment's hesitation, he offered her his arm awkwardly, formally the way a man might who had not done such a thing in a very long time. Amelia looked at the offered arm, and then up at his weathered, anxious face, and she took it. His arm was solid as an oak beam under her hand. "Watch the step here," he said gruffly. "Boards are loose." And that was how it began. The wagon ride to Broken River Ranch was long, and for the first while neither of them spoke much. Amelia was grateful for it. She was worn to the bone, and there was too much to take in, and she needed the quiet to steady herself. William drove with easy competence, his big hands loose on the reins, and every so often she caught him glancing sideways at her, and every time he did, he looked quickly away, as though he'd been caught at something. Finally, to break the silence, she said, "You said the nearest neighbor is 4 miles off." 4 miles, yes, ma'am. The Muellers. German family, good people. Keep to themselves mostly, but Greta Mueller's the one you'd send for if you took sick and she'd come. He clicked his tongue at the horses. Town's 11 miles the other way. We go in once a month maybe for supplies, less in winter. And in winter Amelia hesitated. You're just out here, alone. Something crossed his face. I have been, he said. Yes. They rode a little further. Can I ask you something, Miss Carter? He said, and there was a new carefulness in his voice. You can ask me anything. I told you in my letter, I mean to be honest with you always. That goes both ways, or it's no good at all. He nodded slowly, as if filing that away. In your letter, the second one, you wrote something about your father. About walls. Building walls with cracked bricks. I remember. My own father was a mason, William said, back in Ohio before we came west. And what you wrote about the cracked bricks being set careful mortared right, making a wall stronger. He shook his head. I read that part maybe a dozen times, because he used to say the very same thing, word for word near enough. And I got to thinking, how does a girl in Kansas come to say the exact thing my dead father used to say about masonry and mean it about people? He glanced at her. I reckon it's because it's true, about walls and about people both. I reckon your daddy and mine knew the same thing. Amelia felt her throat tighten. I think they might have. I'm sorry he's gone, William said simply. Your father. I'm sorry for it. Sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man I ever knew. Amelia looked out at the passing country. Until 3 letters showed up from a rancher in Montana who wanted to know my heart. She hadn't meant to say it. It slipped out. And she felt her face go hot the moment it did, and she braced herself for she didn't know what. Some rough deflection. Some awkward silence. Instead, William Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and then he said in a low voice, not looking at her, Well, I meant it. I do want to know it. Your heart. He cleared his throat hard. That come out plainer than I intended. But I'll not take it back because it's true and I promised you honest. Neither of them said anything else for near a mile. But Amelia noticed that his hands had tightened just slightly on the reins, and that the tips of his ears had gone red above his collar, and she understood that this hard, silent man had just said something that cost him a great deal to say and had not run from it after. She tucked that away in her heart, the way he'd tucked away her words about the bricks. The ranch house, when they finally came to it, was larger and finer than she'd expected. A solid 2-story place of squared logs and dressed lumber, with a wide porch and glass windows, and a stone chimney, sitting in a broad valley with the river running silver in the distance, and the mountains rising behind. Amelia stared at it as the wagon came up the rise. You said you wanted for nothing, she murmured. You didn't say the half of it. Mr. Hayes, that's a fine house. It's an empty house, he said, not bitterly, just plainly as a man states a fact. Been empty a long while, whatever it looks like from the outside. He pulled the wagon up before the porch and set the brake, and then he sat there a moment, not moving to get down, and Amelia sensed there was something more he wanted to say. Go on, she said gently. Say it, whatever it is. He looked at her surprised. You get a look, Amelia explained, when there's something you're working up to, around the jaw. I've only known you an hour and I can already see it. So go on and say it and save us both the wonderin'. For the first time since the platform, something like a real smile touched William Hayes's mouth, brief, startled, almost boyish, under the gray beard. Nobody's ever read me that quick before, he said. Catherine, my first wife. She said after 10 years she couldn't tell what I was thinking if her life depended on it, and you've done it inside an hour. Maybe she wasn't looking the right way, Amelia said. Or maybe you didn't want her to. Which was it? The smile faded, and William's face went carefully blank, and Amelia knew at once she'd struck something. That, he said after a moment, is a longer conversation than a wagon seat allows. And you're dead on your feet, and I promised you a hot meal, and here I am keeping you talking in the cold. He climbed down and came around to help her, and the moment was gone, folded away behind that shuttered face. But Amelia had seen it. She had seen the door there, and she had seen how fast he'd closed it. Silence, she thought, taking his hand and climbing down from the wagon. He told me himself. He's a hard man to know. But it isn't that there's nothing there. It's that there's too much, and he spent years learning to keep it locked up tight. She filed that away too. Inside the house was clean but bare, in the way of a place kept by a man who lived alone, and had long since stopped noticing what was missing. There was good furniture, solid and well made, but no small things, no curtains, no cloth on the table, none of the 100 little touches that make a house into a home. It had the feel Amelia thought of a fine ship with no one at the helm. William showed her to her room, a real bedroom on the second floor, with a proper bed and a washstand and a window that looked out on the mountains. It was... He stopped. It's a guest room, he finished, though Amelia suspected from the hitch in his voice that it had been something else once. You'll have your privacy. There's a bolt on the inside of the door. I want you to use it first few nights till you feel easy. I mean that. A woman ought to feel safe under a strange man's roof, and I'd rather you bolt the door and know you're safe than lie awake wonderin'. Amelia looked at the bolt, then at him. You keep doing that, she said. Doing what? Thinking of things. Little things. Standing back at the depot so as not to crowd me. The bolt on the door. My own room. She shook her head slowly. Where I come from, Mr. Hayes, nobody thought of me at all. I was invisible when I was lucky, and a target when I wasn't. And you've spent this whole afternoon thinking of one small kindness after another. And I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. I keep waiting for you to turn into all the rest of them, and you just don't. William stood in the doorway, hat still in his hands, and looked at her with something raw and unguarded in his weathered face. Miss Carter, he said slowly, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'll leave you to rest because you need it. I was a poor husband to my first wife. I'll say that flat out, so you hear it from me, and not from the gossip in town, because they'll tell you sure enough next time you're in for supplies. He turned the hat. I wasn't cruel. I never raised a hand nor a voice to her. But I wasn't present. I kept everything locked up, all my worries and my fears, thinking I was protecting her from 'em, thinking that's what a strong man does. And she died. The fever took her quick 3 days start to finish, and I realized I'd lived 10 years next to a woman and never once let her see the inside of me, not once. She died a stranger to me, and I to her. And that... His voice cracked, and he stopped and mastered it. That's the thing I can't forgive myself for. Not that I loved her wrong, that I never let her know me at all. Amelia stood very still. So when you write to a stranger saying you want to know her heart? He went on quieter now, and then that stranger gets off a train and looks at you like you're waiting to be hurt. A man decides some things. A man decides he'd rather be kind and get his heart stepped on than be locked up tight and safe and die a stranger all over again. That's all it is, Miss Carter. It ain't magic. It ain't more than I owe you. It's just a man who learned too late trying not to make the same mistake twice. He put his hat on. Now, there's stew keepin' warm on the stove, and I'll have it dished when you're ready, no rush. And that bolt? He nodded at the door. You use it. Rest now. He turned to go. Mr. Hayes? He stopped. I'm not going to use the bolt, Amelia said. He turned back frowning. Miss Carter, I'd feel a good deal easier if I heard what you said about wanting me to feel safe. She met his eyes steadily. And I do feel safe. That's why I'm not going to use it. A woman who bolts her door is a woman who's afraid of the man on the other side of it. And I've decided I'm not afraid of you, so I won't bolt it. And you'll have to sit with the discomfort of that same as I've been sitting with the discomfort of your kindness all afternoon. Seems only fair we're both uneasy. William Hayes looked at her for a long, long moment. You, he said at last, are not one bit what I expected. No, Amelia agreed. I don't imagine I am. Neither are you. Now go dish up that stew. I find I'm hungrier than I've been in a month. The first days at Broken River Ranch passed in a strange, careful dance. They were two strangers under one roof, circling each other, learning the shape of each other by inches. William was up before dawn every morning out with the cattle and the horses and the endless work of a ranch. And Amelia, who had promised him and herself that she would not sit idle and be a burden, set about the house. She was ruthless about it. Within 3 days, she had that bare, empty house turned upside down. She found linens gone gray from a man's careless washing and boiled them white again. She scrubbed floors that hadn't seen a proper scrubbing in years. She took stock of the pantry and found it a disgrace. Flour gone weevily preserves spoiled everything, bought carelessly and stored worse. She made lists. She reorganized. She hung the one set of curtains she found folded in a trunk, and when William came in that first evening and saw curtains on the windows, he stopped dead in the doorway and stared at them like they were a ghost. Those were, he started, Catherine's. I found them in the cedar trunk. I'll take them down if it troubles you. Amelia's hand went still on the pot she was stirring. I should have asked. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. No. William came in slowly, hung his hat, and stood looking at the curtains. No, leave them. She bought them the first year and never hung them. Said the house wasn't ready. It was never ready somehow. There was always some reason. He was quiet a moment. 10 years those sat in that trunk, and you had 'em up in an afternoon. He turned to her, and his voice was odd. You do that. You just do things. Things that sat undone for years, you just up and do 'em. That's what a body's for, Amelia said. Doing things. My father used to say a house is a machine for livin' in, and a machine that sits idle rusts. Same as a person. She lifted the lid off the pot. Now come eat. I made your mother's recipe, or my guess at it you said in your letter, she made a rabbit stew you never could match. I found rabbit in the smokehouse and I took a run at it. It's probably wrong. Tell me if it's wrong. William came to the table slowly. He sat. He took a spoonful of the stew, and then he set the spoon down and put his face in one big hand, and his shoulders shook. And for a moment, Amelia thought she'd wounded him terribly, until she realized the sound coming from behind his hand was not weeping, or not only weeping. It's wrong, he said muffled, and there was a laugh buried in the crack of his voice. It's Miss Carter. It's near exactly right. It's the closest thing to my mother's stew I've had in 20 years, and I don't how in the world I didn't give you the recipe. I never had the recipe. She never wrote it down. You told me it had sage in it, and that she cooked it slow, and that there was something sweet you could never place, Amelia said. In your second letter. I figured the sweet was a spoon of molasses, because that's what my own mother did with a tough old rabbit. Was I right? Was it molasses? William lowered his hand. His eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide it, and Amelia thought that alone was a kind of miracle, given everything he'd told her about himself. I don't know, he said. I never knew what it was, but it tastes like... His voice broke clean through. "It tastes like being a boy again. Before Pa passed. Before any of it." He looked at her across the table, this hard, silent man undone by a bowl of stew. "You read 3 letters, and you found my dead mother's recipe in the spaces between the words. How? How do you do that?" "I listen," Amelia said simply. "It's the only thing I was ever any good at that nobody wanted. Turns out you want it." She sat down across from him and picked up her own spoon. "Eat your stew, William. It'll get cold, and cold it really would be wrong." It was the first time she'd used his given name. She saw him notice it. She saw him decide not to remark on it, and she was glad, because she wasn't sure she could have explained why it had slipped out, except that a man weeping over his mother's rabbit stew was not a Mr. Hayes anymore. He was just William. They ate the rest of the meal in a silence that was for the first time entirely comfortable. But not all the days were like that one. There were hard days too, and the first truly hard one came at the end of that first week, and it came from town. They drove in for supplies on a Saturday, and Amelia learned quickly that the gossip of Cedar Valley had a cousin in Montana. Word had gone round the way word does in small places that William Hayes of Broken River had sent away for a wife a mail-order bride come all the way from Kansas, and the whole town, it seemed, had turned out to have a look at her. She felt their eyes the moment she stepped down from the wagon. She knew the feeling too well to mistake it. The women on the mercantile porch, the men outside the saloon, the way conversation dropped and heads turned, and a low murmur ran along the boardwalk. "That's her. That's the one he sent for. Would you look at the size of she'll hear you." Amelia's spine went stiff. Some old cringing part of her wanted to climb back into the wagon and hide. She did not. She lifted her chin and walked toward the mercantile at William's side, and she made herself meet every eye that met hers, and she watched most of them look away, because cruel people are so often cowards when their cruelty is looked at straight. But one woman did not look away. She was a tall, handsome woman of perhaps 40, well-dressed, standing at the center of the porch as though she owned it, and she watched Amelia come with a small, cold smile that Amelia recognized instantly. She had known 100 Mrs. Halloways. This was just the Montana one. "William Hayes," the woman said in a carrying voice, pitched for the whole porch to hear. "Now here's a surprise. We'd all near given up on you ever taken another wife." Her eyes slid over Amelia, head to foot, slow and deliberate and insulting. "Though I confess we did wonder what sort of woman you'd settle on a fine catch like yourself. Catherine being such a beauty and all." The smile sharpened. "I suppose when a man's desperate enough he'll take what he can get from a catalog." The porch went very quiet. Amelia felt the old heat rush up her neck, the shame, the hurt, the terrible urge to shrink. She opened her mouth, though she didn't yet know what she'd say. She never got the chance to say it, because William Hayes stepped forward one deliberate step that put him half in front of Amelia and squared his shoulders to the woman on the porch, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, and it was cold, and it carried like a struck bell. "Ada Crawford," he said, "you've said your piece. Now I'll say mine, and I'll say it once so the whole porch hears it, and I don't have to say it twice." Nobody moved. "This is Miss Amelia Carter," William said. "She is the finest, sharpest, kindest person to set foot in this valley in a good many years, and she has been under my roof 1 week, and in that week she has done more to make that house a home than—" He stopped, and Amelia saw the muscle jump in his jaw, and she braced for him to close up, to go silent, to lock the door the way he always did. He didn't. "Than my first wife did in 10 years. He finished low and rough. "And I'll tell you why. Because Amelia Carter looks at a thing that needs doing, and she does it. Because she reads a man's letters and finds his dead mother's cooking in 'em. Because she got off a train alone in a strange territory to build a life with a hard old widower she'd never laid eyes on, and that Ada is the bravest thing I ever saw, and I've seen men face down grizzlies." He took a breath. "You called me desperate. Well, you're half right. I was desperate. I was desperate as a man can be desperate to not die the way I near did alone in an empty house I let go cold with my own 2 hands. And this woman you're standing there sneering at, is the answer to that desperation. So yes, ma'am. I sent away for a wife. Best thing I ever did. And if you or anybody else on this porch has got something more to say about it, you can say it to me direct, and we'll settle it. But you'll not say another word to her, not one. Are we clear? The silence on the porch was total. Ada Crawford's cold smile had frozen into something brittle. She opened her mouth, closed it, and found she had nothing to say to a man who had just laid himself open in front of the whole town in defense of a woman he'd known a week. Well, she managed at last, thin and furious. I'm sure I meant no. Good day, Ada, William said, and it was not a pleasantry. It was a dismissal. He turned his back on her deliberately, the greatest insult one could offer, and he offered Amelia his arm, and he said gently now, in an entirely different voice, Miss Carter, shall we get our supplies? I believe you had a list. Amelia took his arm. Her hand was trembling. She did not entirely trust herself to speak. They walked past Ada Crawford and into the mercantile, and it was not until they were inside among the shelves, away from the eyes on the porch, that Amelia stopped and turned to him. You didn't have to do that, she said. Her voice was unsteady. William, you just told the whole town your business. Things you told me were private. Things about Catherine, about the empty house. You said them out loud on a porch in front of everyone for me. Why would you do that? You barely know me. William looked down at her. And for once the shuttered face was completely open. I told you at the depot, he said. I decided I'd rather be kind and get my heart stepped on than be locked up safe and die a stranger. Well, that woman was fixin' to make you feel the way this world's made you feel your whole life. And I found... He shook his head like he was surprised at himself. I found I would sooner set fire to every private thing I own than stand there and let it happen. That's how I know I meant it all that I wrote to you. Because standin' on that porch just now keepin' quiet would have been the easy thing, the safe thing, the old William Hayes thing, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand there and watch you get small. Not you. His voice dropped. Never you. Amelia looked up at this rough, gray-bearded stranger who was fast becoming the least strange person she had ever known, and she felt something turn over in her chest, something enormous and terrifying and entirely new. I've known you 8 days, she said unsteadily. I know it. 8 days, and you defended me like you were worth defendin', William said. Because you are. And it took me 8 days to learn what that whole town of yours in Kansas couldn't learn in 24 years. And I don't think that speaks well of them, Miss Carter. But I'll confess it speaks awful well of you. Amelia had to turn away then, to a shelf of dry goods, and pretend a great interest in a sack of cornmeal, because she was crying again, and she was heartily sick of crying in front of this man. Behind her, she heard him say gently, Take your time. I'll go settle up front. Come find me when you're ready. No hurry at all. And that, more than the words on the porch, more than the stew, more than any of it, that quiet no hurry, that willingness to simply let her feel what she felt, and not rush her out of it, that was the moment Amelia Carter understood she was in real danger. Because she had come to Montana to build a partnership. A sensible arrangement. A shared life between two people with clear eyes and no illusions. And instead, standing in a mercantile with tears running down her face over a sack of cornmeal, she had gone and started to fall in love. The trouble was, she didn't know if he had. That was the thing that kept her up at night in the weeks that followed. Because for all his kindness, for all the ferocity of that defense on the porch, William Hayes remained at his core exactly what he'd warned her he was a hard man to know. He could be tender in a moment and then vanish behind that shuttered face for a day. He could weep over rabbit stew one night and then the next, when she asked him something true, something about Catherine, about his grief, about what he wanted from the years ahead, go stiff and quiet and change the subject to the weather or the cattle or the price of feed. She learned the shape of his silences the way a sailor learns weather. There was a comfortable silence when they sat by the fire of an evening, and neither felt the need to talk. And there was the other kind, the closed-up kind, the drawbridge pulled-up kind, when something had come too near the wound, and he retreated behind stone. and she began to understand that the great work in front of her, greater than the ranch accounts, greater than the pantry, greater than any of it, was going to be the slow, patient teaching of a locked-up man that it was safe to open the door. The accounts gave her the first real opening. She'd asked him near the end of the second week if she might look at the ranch's books. He'd hesitated, a proud man, a man used to managing his own affairs, but she'd pressed gently. "You said in your letter you wanted a partner. A partner keeps the books alongside you, William. Or she's not a partner, she's a housekeeper. Which do you want me to be?" He'd brought her the books, and Amelia, who could do sums faster than any man at the bank in Cedar Valley, sat down at the table with the ledgers and a lamp, and within 2 evenings she found the trouble. "William," she looked up from the books, "how long have you been losing money?" He went still. "What do you mean, losing money?" "I mean the ranch is bleeding, slow but steady. You've been selling cattle at a loss for 2 years because you're taking whatever the buyer in town offers instead of driving them to the railhead where they'd fetch near double. You're paying twice what you should for feed because you buy it in small lots when you're short instead of laying in a proper supply. And this," she tapped a column, "this man Purvis, that you've got a standing arrangement with William, he's been shorting you for years. Look here and here, the weights don't add up. He's cheating you and he's counted on you never checking, and you never have." William came around the table and looked over her shoulder at the columns of figures, and Amelia watched his face change as she walked him through it, number by number, watched disbelief become understanding, become a slow, dark anger. "That son of a—" He caught himself. "Beg pardon. But 2 years. He's been robbing me 2 years. Longer, I'd guess, but the older books aren't here. 2 years I can prove." Amelia sat back. "Now, it's fixable, all of it. You've got good land and good stock, and there's no reason on earth this ranch shouldn't turn a handsome profit. But you've been running it like a grieving man who stopped paying attention. Which is exactly what you were. And I don't say that to shame you. I say it because a grieving man who stops paying attention is a thing I understand very well, having watched my father do the same after my mother passed. It's not weakness, William. It's just what grief does. It makes the numbers stop mattering." She met his eyes. "But they matter again now, because I'm here. And I'm very, very good with numbers. So let's fix it." William Hayes stared down at the woman sitting at his kitchen table, who had come into his house 2 weeks ago knowing nothing of cattle or ranching or any of it, and who had just found in 2 evenings a theft that had been draining him dry for years while he sat in his grief and never noticed. "Catherine never looked at the books once," he said quietly. "Wouldn't have known a profit from a loss. Wasn't her way, and I never asked it of her." He shook his head slowly. 2 weeks. You've been here 2 weeks. You keep saying that, however long I've been here. I keep saying it, William said, because every few days you do something that a body couldn't do in 2 weeks, and yet there you sit, having done it. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down heavily. "All right, teach me. Show me how you found it. I want to understand it, not just be told. If we're partners, I'll not have you keeping the books like some mystery I can't follow. Show me the whole of it." And so, by lamplight at the kitchen table, a woman who had been told her whole life that her cleverness was worthless taught a man who had been told his whole life that a strong man handles everything alone. She showed him the columns and the weights and the losses. He asked good questions. He learned fast. And somewhere in the middle of it, without either of them quite noticing, when they had stopped being 2 wary strangers negotiating an arrangement, and become something that looked from the outside an awful lot like a team. It was near midnight when they finished. Amelia's eyes were burning, and William had long since taken off his boots and rolled up his sleeves, and there was cold coffee in both their cups, and a plan on paper for how to set the ranch right. Drive the cattle to the railhead in spring break. With the thieving Purvis, lay in feed proper, all of it. "We'll be in the black inside a year," Amelia said, sitting back satisfied. 2 at the outside. "And after that, William, this place could be one of the finest ranches in the territory. It's got everything it needs. It only wanted somebody to pay attention." William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, not looking at the papers, looking at her, "It only wanted you." Amelia's breath caught. "I don't mean the ranch," he said roughly, as though the words were being pulled out of him against his will. "I mean the ranch, yes. But not just—" He stopped. His jaw worked, and Amelia watched him come right up to the edge of something, right up to the very lip of it, some true and enormous thing he wanted to say. And then the drawbridge came up. She saw it happen. She saw the shutter come down over his face, saw him pull back from the edge, saw the locked-up man reassert himself. "It's late," he said, standing abruptly, gathering the cold coffee cups. "You've been at these books 2 days straight, and it's near midnight. You ought to sleep. Big day tomorrow. I'll ride out to the Mullers and see about William." He stopped, a cup in each hand. "You were about to say something," Amelia said quietly. "Just now, something real. And then you stopped." "I said what I meant. The ranch wanted your attention. It's the plain truth." "That's not what you were going to say." He stood there holding the 2 cold cups. This big, powerful man, and Amelia watched him fight himself. Watched the man who wanted to speak wrestle with the man who'd spent 40 years learning that speaking got you hurt. That opening the door let the cold in. That a strong man carries it all in silence and gives nothing away. "Amelia," he said finally, and his voice was low and strained. "I told you I was a hard man to know. I told you plain in the letter before you ever came. I said there'd be days you were lonesome enough to weep, and I wouldn't know how to comfort you because I'm not. I can't." He set the cups down hard on the table. "There are things I want to say. There are things I feel that I haven't felt in so long I don't rightly have the words for 'em anymore. And every time I get near saying 'em, something in me just locks, shuts, like a door slamming in a wind. And I hate it. I hate it more than you know. But I can't seem to—" His voice broke. "I don't know how to stop doing it. I did it to Catherine for 10 years, and it killed everything we might have had, and now I'm standing in my own kitchen doing it to you, and I can see myself doing it, and I still can't stop." The confession hung in the air between them, and Amelia understood in that moment that this was the real man, not the tender one who wept over Stu, not the fierce one who'd faced down Ada Crawford, but this one, a man locked inside himself, hammering on the door from the inside, unable to find the way out. And she understood that everything, the whole future, the partnership, the something more that had started growing between them, all of it depended on whether she could be patient enough and stubborn enough and brave enough to stand outside that door and keep knocking until he learned to open it. "Then don't stop doing it all at once," she said softly. "Nobody unlocks 40 years in a night. But William, look at me." She waited until he did. "You just told me you can't say what you feel. And do you understand what that was? Telling me you can't tell me that was telling me. You just opened the door a crack, just now. You did the very thing you swear you can't do." She stood and crossed to him and stopped closer than she'd ever stood to him. "So here's what we're going to do. We're not going to fix it tonight. We're not going to fix it in a week. We're going to do it the way I'd rebuild this ranch, or the way your father built a wall, one careful brick at a time, cracked ones and whole ones both set patient and mortared right. And it'll take as long as it takes. And I'll be here for the whole of it. Because I didn't come 1,000 miles for an easy man, William Hayes. Sarah Beaumont told me before I left that fear you feel when you want something so bad it terrifies you, that's not a reason to run. That's the surest sign you've found something worth reaching for." She reached up slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and laid her hand flat against his chest, over his hammering heart. "I'm not going to run. Do you hear me? Whatever's locked up in there, I'm not going anywhere, so you take all the time you need. But you'd best get used to me knocking, because I don't intend to stop." William Hayes looked down at the small, strong hand pressed over his heart, and then up at the face of the woman he'd sent away, for the woman the whole world had thrown away, the woman who had walked into his cold, empty house 2 weeks ago and lit every lamp in it. And for a long, long moment, he did not say anything at all. But he did not pull away, and he did not close the door. He put his own big, rough, calloused hand over hers and held it there against his heart, and he let her feel exactly how hard it was beating. It was not the words. He couldn't manage the words, not yet. But it was Amelia understood it was the closest thing to them that a locked-up man had left to give. And it was for tonight enough. She stood there in the lamplight with her hand over his pounding heart and his hand over hers. Two broken people in a house that had been cold for 10 years and was at last beginning to warm, and she thought, one brick at a time. However long it takes. And outside, the Montana wind came down off the mountains and moved through the valley, and rattled Catherine's curtains in the windows, and found for the first time in a decade a house with two hearts beating warm inside it against the cold. The warmth did not last the winter. It came on a Tuesday in late January. The trouble did the kind of cold Kansas had never known the kind that killed. William had warned her the winters would try her in ways she couldn't imagine sitting in a warm kitchen back home. And Amelia had believed him the way a person believes a thing they've never felt. Then the storm came down off the mountains and she understood. It started with the cattle. William came in at dusk 3 days into the blow with ice in his beard and a grimness in his face she'd not seen before. He'd been out since before light, and Amelia had spent the whole day at the window watching the snow come sideways and telling herself he knew this country. He'd survived a dozen of these, he'd come home. He came home. But he came home wrong. We're losing 'em, he said before he'd even got his coat off. The herd. They're drifting with the storm piling up against the north fence, and they'll freeze there, or they'll break through and scatter into the hills, and I'll never find 'em. Either way. He stopped, and Amelia saw him doing sums in his head, the sums she'd taught him, and she saw the answer land in his face. Either way, it's half the herd, maybe more. Everything we planned, the railhead, the drive getting into the Black Amelia, if I lose that herd tonight, we're done. Not hurt. Done. Amelia was already reaching for her coat. What in the world do you think you're doing? Coming with you. You are not. His voice was sharp, sharper than he'd ever used with her. It's 40 below out there with the wind. You've never worked cattle in your life, let alone in a killin' storm. You'd be dead inside an hour, and I'd be trying to save you stead of the herd. You'll stay in this house. William Hayes. Amelia buttoned the coat. You told me you wanted a partner. A partner does not sit by the fire while her partner rides out to lose everything alone. I can't rope a steer, no. But I can hold a lantern. I can open and shut a gate. I can drive the wagon and keep the coffee hot and the fire built and pull you out of a drift if you go down. I can be your second pair of hands. And I will not. I will not sit in this warm kitchen and listen to you fight for our life out there alone. So you can either take me, or you can waste 10 more minutes. We don't have arguing with me, and either way, I'm putting on my boots. They stood there, the two of them, the storm screaming against the windows. And William, who had spent 40 years handling everything alone, who had watched a wife die a stranger to him, because he'd never once let her stand beside him in the hard things. William looked at this woman pulling on her boots, and something in him broke open, or broke down, or both. Get the wool scarf off the peg, he said hoarsely. Wrap it round your face till only your eyes show. And Amelia. He grabbed her arm as she moved for the door. You stay where I can see you, every second. You lose sight of me in that snow, you stop, you don't move, you shout, and I'll come back for you. Swear it to me. Swear it or you don't come. I swear it. They went out into the storm together. What followed were the worst hours of Amelia Carter's life, and she would understand this only later, some of the most important. She could not have described afterward all that happened. It came to her in pieces, in fragments of noise and cold and terror. The lantern swinging in her frozen hand. William's voice hoarse from shouting, guiding the drifting cattle back from the fence. The way the wind stole the breath out of your mouth. The stinging blindness of the snow. Her own body past exhaustion, past cold, working on nothing but the refusal to be the reason he failed. She held the lantern. She worked the gate. When a young steer went down in a drift, and William could not lift it alone, she threw her whole weight against it beside him, and the two of them together got it up and moving, and she heard him shout something into the wind that might have been her name, and might have been good, and might have been both, hour after hour. Half the herd, then more than half, fighting for every animal, fighting the cold that wanted them dead. And through it all, William at the center of it, and Amelia beside him, never more than 10 feet off a lantern in the dark, so that whenever he turned to find her, she was there, and she watched something change in his face each time he found her still standing, still working, still there. It was near dawn when they got the last of them into the shelter of the south draw out of the wind where they'd live. William dropped the coil of rope from his frozen hands. He turned to her. His face was gray with cold, and exhaustion ice-caked in his beard, and he looked at her, and he opened his mouth, and no words came out. So instead, he crossed the 3 feet between them, and pulled her into his arms, and held on to her like a drowning man holds on to the thing that saves him. Amelia felt his whole body shaking from the cold. Yes, but not only the cold, and she felt his face pressed down against the top of her frozen head, and she felt more than heard the words he finally managed torn out of him, muffled in her hair. You stayed. All night. In that you stayed. Nobody ever. Amelia, nobody ever stayed. I told you I wouldn't run. Her own voice was a cracked whisper. I meant all of it. The books and the storm and the all of it. I'm not going anywhere, William. How many times do I have to say it before you believe me? He pulled back just far enough to look at her there in the gray first light, both of them half frozen and past the end of their strength, the saved herd steaming in the draw below them. I believe you, he said. God help me. I believe you now. And then, at last, after the letters and the depot and the stew and the porch and the books and the hand held over his hammering heart, after all the times he'd come to the lip of it and pulled back, William Hayes said the thing he could not say. I love you. It came out rough and broken and disbelieving, like a man speaking a foreign tongue he'd forgotten he knew. I've loved you since the mercantile, since the cornmeal. I stood there watching you cry over a sack of cornmeal, and I thought there she is, there's the one, and I waited 40 years for her and near missed her. And I couldn't say it. I couldn't say it for weeks, because saying it makes it real, and real things can be lost, and I've lost. His voice failed. But I near lost you tonight to a snowstorm, and I'll be damned if I let you almost die not knowing. I love you, Amelia Carter. There. It's said. It's out. 40 years locked up, and a snowstorm's what it took to... She kissed him. She had to stop the flood of words, and because she could not have said one of her own if her life depended on it, and because a woman does not travel 1,000 miles and fight a blizzard all night to stand 3 feet from the man she loves, telling her he loves her, and not kiss him. They stood in the snow at dawn, the two of them half frozen and wholly alive, and kissed like people who had both spent their whole lives being told they were not worth loving, and had just discovered in the same impossible moment that they were. They came down out of the hills that morning changed. The winter which had nearly broken them had instead done the opposite. Something had been forged in that storm that no amount of gentle lamplit evenings could have forged, the certain knowledge tested against the killing cold, that when it came to the worst, they would not leave each other. It was one thing to say, I won't run in a warm kitchen. It was another to prove it at 40 below with half your fortune drifting toward a fence. And William, who had needed the proof more than he'd ever admit, was different after. Not fixed. Amelia was not so foolish as to think a man unlocked 40 years in a single night. The drawbridge still came up sometimes. The silences still fell. But now when they did, she understood them, and more importantly, so did he. He would catch himself going quiet, and he would stop, and he would say awkward, halting, but out loud. I'm doing it again. Give me a minute. There's a thing I want to say, and I've got to find the door for it. And she would wait, and he would find it, and every time he did, the finding got a little easier. It was, she thought, exactly like she'd promised him. One brick at a time. They were happy that late winter and into the spring, genuinely, quietly, deeply happy in the way of two people who had waited so long and expected so little that every ordinary day felt like a gift stolen back from a world that had tried to deny them. They drove the surviving herd to the railhead when the passes cleared and got near double what the thieving Purvis would ever have paid, and Amelia's ledgers began for the first time in years to show black ink instead of red. They talked of the future. They planned. William began slowly to speak of Catherine, without the old locked-up pain to grieve her, finally in the open, the way he never had with Amelia, sitting beside him, holding his hand. And Amelia understood that this too was a kind of healing, that a man cannot fully love a new life until he's properly buried the old one, and that she was strong enough to help him do both. She wrote to Sarah every month as promised, and Sarah wrote back dictated to Fenwick's boy, full of Cedar Valley gossip and fierce pride. The whole town knows you married a fine rancher and set his books to rights, one letter ran. Prudence Holloway pretends she always knew you'd land on your feet. Lying old buzzard. Betsy Patterson's engaged to a drunk, and I'll say no more on that. Come see me when you can, child, but not till you're good and ready, and not for one day before you're happy. Are you happy? Write and tell me you're happy. Amelia wrote back, I am happy, Sarah. Happier than I knew a person could be. The kind of happy that scares you a little. She did not know writing it how right she was to be scared, because the past does not stay buried simply because we've stopped digging. And the thing that came to Broken River Ranch that spring came not from the storm, or the cattle, or the town's cruelty, but from the one place Amelia had never thought to guard from Catherine's grave, and the secret it had kept for 10 years. It came in the form of a rider. He came up the road on a fine horse on a warm afternoon in May, a well-dressed man of perhaps 40. City clothes, city manners, a face Amelia had never seen. William was out in the far pasture. Amelia was on the porch, and the man reined up and tipped his hat, and looked at her with a strange, searching expression, and said, I beg your pardon, ma'am. I'm looking for William Hayes. Would this be the Hayes place? It would. He's out in the far pasture. I can send for him. May I tell him who's calling? The man hesitated, and in the hesitation, Amelia felt the first cold prickle of something wrong. My name is Thomas Ashford, he said. I've come from Chicago. He stopped and started again. This is a delicate matter, ma'am. Are you Mr. Hayes's? Forgive me. Are you his wife? I am. She had not been, not legally, not yet. They'd spoken of it, planned. It kept putting it off for the spring work, but she said it without hesitation, because it was true in every way that mattered, and because something in this man's face told her she'd best be standing on solid ground. Then I'm sorry, Thomas Ashford said, because what I've come to say concerns his first wife, Catherine, and it may distress you both a great deal. I've thought a long time about whether to come at all, but a man has a right to know the truth about his own life, and so does the woman standing beside him. He dismounted. Might I trouble you for some water for my horse and a few minutes of Mr. Hayes's time? I promise you I've not ridden 2,000 miles to make trouble. I've ridden it to end a lie that's gone on too long. Amelia's heart had begun to pound. But she was not the woman who'd wept in the Kansas mud anymore. She was the woman who'd faced down a snowstorm and a sneering town, and she'd learned that the only way through a hard thing was straight into it. Sit down, Mr. Ashford, she said steadily. I'll get water for your horse and coffee for you, and I'll send the boy to fetch my husband. And then you'll tell us both of us together whatever it is you've come to say. Because whatever's coming, William and I will hear it side by side. That's how we do things now. William came in from the pasture at a hard gallop when the boy reached him. Amelia had said only that a man had come from Chicago about Catherine, and that had been enough to bring him running. He swung down off his horse and took the porch steps 2 at a time, and stopped short at the sight of the stranger sitting there. Who are you? William said. And what have you got to do with my Catherine? Thomas Ashford stood. He was a smaller man than William, and softer, but he held his ground, and there was in his face a mix of dread and resolve that told Amelia he'd braced himself for this a long time. Mr. Hayes, my name is Thomas Ashford, and I'm afraid I've got a great deal to do with Catherine. He took a breath. She was my sister. William went still. Catherine had no family. She was an orphan. She always told me she had nobody. That's half of why He stopped. You're lying. I'm not. Ashford reached into his coat slowly and drew out a small bundle of letters tied with string, worn soft with handling. These are letters she wrote me. Over the 10 years of your marriage. I've got more at home. These are the ones that matter. She wrote to me in secret, Mr. Hayes, and she made me swear never to come here, never to find her, never to tell you I existed. And I kept that promise while she lived. But she's been dead 3 years now, and I've read these letters near to pieces, and I've come to believe that keeping her secret past her death does her no honor and you a great wrong. So I'm here, to break my promise. Because you deserve to know who she really was. And so I think... His eyes moved to Amelia. Does the woman who came after her. William took the letters with a hand that was not quite steady. Why in God's name would my wife write her own brother in secret for 10 years? He said low, and swear him never to come near. What did I do? What kind of a man was I that she... You didn't do anything. Ashford's voice was gentle now, almost pained. That's the thing you've got to understand, Mr. Hayes, and it's the thing I've come 2,000 miles to tell you. You didn't drive her to secrets. She came to you already full of them. Catherine, he hesitated. Our family wasn't poor orphans, sir. Our father was a wealthy man in Chicago, and Catherine ran from him. She ran because he'd promised her to a man she despised a business match, and she'd sooner have died than marry him. So she ran west, and she changed her story, and she made herself an orphan with no past, because a woman with no past can't be dragged back to one. And she answered an advertisement same as your Amelia here, from a Montana rancher who wanted a wife. He looked at William with something like compassion. She didn't marry you for love, Mr. Hayes, not at first. She married you to disappear. You were her hiding place. The silence on the porch was absolute. Amelia watched William's face and could not read it, could not tell if what was crossing it was grief or anger or the terrible vertigo of a man watching 10 years of his life turn into something other than what he'd believed. She moved quietly to stand beside him. She did not touch him. She just stood there close so he'd know she was there. You're telling me, William said slowly, that my wife married me to hide from her father. That she never, that the whole 10 years. No. Ashford stepped forward urgent now. No, that's exactly what I don't want you to think. And it's why I came in person instead of just mailing you the letters. Read them, Mr. Hayes. Read what she actually wrote. Yes, she married you to disappear. That's the truth, and it's a hard one, and I'll not soften it. But listen to me. He pressed the bundle more firmly into William's hands. She fell in love with you, after. It's in every letter. She came to you cold using you, and you were so she wrote it 100 ways. You were so good to her, so patient, so gentle with a woman who'd given you nothing but a false name and a false past, that she fell in love with the husband she'd married as a lie. And it undid her. Because she'd built her whole self on secrets, and now she loved a man she was lying to, and she didn't know how to stop lying without losing him. That's the woman you were married to, Mr. Hayes, not a cold woman. A frightened one. A woman who loved you and couldn't tell you because telling you meant confessing that the whole foundation was false. William looked down at the letters in his hands as if they'd caught fire. She told me she couldn't reach me, he said hollow. Near the end, the last winter. She said, William, I feel like there's a wall between us, and I don't know who built it. And I thought all these years, I thought it was me. My silence. My locked-up ways. I thought I built that wall, that I did to her what my own nature does, and that she died on the far side of it because I couldn't... His voice cracked clean through. I've carried that 3 years. That I killed our marriage with my silence. And you're telling me, you both built it, Ashford said quietly. That's the truth of it. You with your silences, her with her secrets. Two people who each thought they were protecting the other, and each one just built the wall higher. She couldn't tell you her past. You couldn't tell her your heart. And so you lived 10 years 4 feet apart and never touched, and each of you blamed yourself for the whole of it, when the truth is, you were both doing the exact same thing out of the exact same fear. He shook his head slowly. You didn't fail her, Mr. Hayes. You were both failing each other in the same way at the same time, and neither one of you ever knew, because neither one of you could ever say. Amelia felt the whole thing land in her chest like a stone dropped in a well, because she understood. She understood before William did what this meant and what it cost and what it gave back. Because for weeks now, she'd watched William carry a guilt so heavy, it had nearly kept him from loving again the belief that he was a man who killed love with silence, that he'd let Catherine die a stranger through some fatal coldness in his own nature. It was the thing behind every drawbridge, every locked door, every time he'd pulled back from the edge. I did it to Catherine for 10 years, and it killed everything he'd told her in the kitchen. He'd believed himself a man who couldn't be trusted with a heart. And now here was Catherine's own brother 2,000 miles from home telling him it wasn't true. Telling him he'd been gentle. Telling him he'd been so good to a woman lying to him that she'd fallen in love against her own will. Telling him the wall had been built by two frightened people, and not by his failure alone. "Read them," Ashford said again softly. "Read them tonight, the both of you, and you'll see. There's one in there." His own voice thickened. "The last one she ever wrote me 3 weeks before the fever. I'll not spoil it. But you should know, Mr. Hayes, before you read it, that my sister died loving you desperately and never finding the courage to tell you the truth. And I think I have come to believe that the kindest thing I can do for her memory and for you is to give you the words she couldn't say herself." He picked up his hat. "I'll not intrude on you further. There's an inn in town. I'll stay 2 days in case you've questions, and then I'll go home and I'll not trouble you again. But I couldn't die myself someday knowing I'd let you go on believing you failed a woman who loved you. That's all. That's why I came. God bless you both." He tipped his hat to Amelia, and he mounted, and he rode back down the road toward town, and left the two of them standing on the porch with a bundle of letters, and 10 years of the past turned suddenly, wrenchingly inside out. William did not speak for a long time. Amelia did not push him. She'd learned. She simply took his arm and drew him inside and sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd found the theft in the books where they'd become a team by lamplight, and she put the coffee on, and she waited. When at last he spoke, his voice was very quiet. 3 years, he said. 3 years I've believed I was a man who couldn't love right, that my silence was a kind of poison that killed the one marriage I had. It's why Amelia. It's why I fought you so hard. Every time I felt myself getting close to you, getting to where I might say what I felt, this voice in me said, "Don't. You did this before. You'll do it again. You'll let her in, and then you'll go cold and she'll die a stranger, same as Catherine. And it'll be your fault, same as it was your fault before." He put his face in his hands. "I've been so afraid of doing to you what I thought I did to her. And it turns out I didn't even do it to her. It turns out you were two people too frightened to be honest," Amelia said gently. "And you spent 3 years taking all the blame for something that took 2 of you to build. Oh, William." She reached across the table and took his hands and pulled them away from his face. "Do you see it? Do you see what he just gave you?" "I don't." "He gave you back your innocence." Her eyes were wet. "You've been walking around 3 years believing you're a man who destroys love with silence, and a good man believing that about himself does exactly what you did. He locks the door and swears never to love again because he thinks he's dangerous. He thinks loving him is a death sentence. He thinks the kindest thing he can do is keep himself shut away where he can't hurt anybody." She squeezed his hands hard. "That's the wall I've been knocking on all these weeks. Not just your nature. Not just 40 years of habit. It was guilt, William. A guilt for a crime you didn't even commit. And that man just rode 2,000 miles to tell you you're innocent of it." William looked at her, and Amelia watched the truth of it move through him slow, like spring thaw, moving through frozen ground. "You're not a man who kills love with silence," she said. "You're a man who is so afraid of hurting the people he loves that he stopped letting himself love at all. That's not poison, William. That's the opposite of poison. It's a good heart that got convinced it was a bad one. And I'll be honest with you." Her voice broke. "I've never in my life been so grateful to a stranger as I am to that man riding back to town right now. Because I've been fighting your guilt for weeks without even knowing its name. And he just told me its name. And a thing with a name can be beaten." They read the letters that night together by the same lamp they'd done the books by. Amelia read them aloud because William couldn't. His voice gave out on the first one, and she took it gently from his hands and read on while he sat with his head bowed and wept, the tears he'd never let himself weep for Catherine in 3 years of carrying her wrong. And it was all there exactly as Ashford had promised. The frightened girl running from Chicago, the lie of the orphan, the cold arrangement of the marriage. And then, letter by letter, year by year, the slow, astonished thawing of a woman who had married a man as a hiding place and found to her terror that she loved him. He is so gentle. Thomas, one letter ran in Catherine's hand, and Amelia read it soft. I gave him nothing, a false name and a false past and a cold heart, and he asks nothing back. He is patient with me past all reason. Sometimes I catch him looking at me, and I see that he loves me, truly loves me, and it is like a knife because he loves a woman who does not exist. He loves Catherine the orphan. And I cannot tell him there is no such person, that I am someone else entirely, because if I tell him I have lied for years, he will never trust me again, and I would rather have his love built on a lie than lose it with the truth. God forgive me. I am such a coward. I love him, and I let him love a ghost. William made a sound then low and terrible, and Amelia set down the letter and went around the table and held him and let him break. And then she read him the last one. The one Ashford wouldn't spoil. Written 3 weeks before the fever took her. Thomas, I have decided. I am going to tell him everything. I cannot bear it another winter, this wall between us that I built and he thinks he built. I am going to tell him who I am and where I come from and every lie I ever told, and I am going to trust that the goodness I have seen in him for 10 years is real enough to survive the truth. I am so afraid, Thomas. But I have watched this man be gentle with me for 10 years, and I have decided he has earned the truth, and I have decided I would rather lose him honestly than keep him as a liar. I will tell him at Christmas. Pray for me. Pray he can forgive a coward who loved him too late to be brave. The letter was dated the 3rd of December. The fever had taken her the 20th. She had died 17 days before the Christmas she'd meant to tell him the truth. William sat with that letter in his hands for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was wrecked, but it was Amelia heard it. It was different. The 3 years of guilt were draining out of it, and something quieter and cleaner was coming in behind. She was going to tell me, he said. She was coming toward me. All that last winter when I thought she was pulling away, she wasn't pulling away. She was working up her courage to... He pressed the letter to his chest. She died reaching for me, Amelia. Not turning from me. Reaching for me. And I never knew. 3 years I thought she died a stranger who couldn't reach me, and the truth is, she died reaching and just ran out of time. Yes, Amelia whispered. She did. I have to... He stood unsteady. I have to go tell her. I have to go to the grave and tell her I know. That I know she was coming. That I forgive the lies, all of them. That there's nothing to forgive, that she... He was weeping openly now. This man who couldn't say his own heart weeping like the boy he must have once been. That I heard her. 10 years too late and 3 years after she's gone, but I heard her. Will you... He turned to Amelia, helpless. Will you come with me? I can't do it alone. I've done everything alone my whole life, and I can't do this one thing alone. Will you come stand with me while I talk to my dead wife? And Amelia Carter, who had every earthly reason to feel threatened by a dead woman's ghost, who might have felt small beside the beautiful Catherine even now, who could have let jealousy or fear or 100 smaller feelings turn her away from that grave. Amelia stood up and took his hand and said without one moment's hesitation, Of course I'll come. That's what a partner's for, helping you carry what you can't carry alone. I told you that our first week. Come on, let's go tell Catherine you finally heard her. They walked out together to the little fenced plot where Catherine Hayes had lain 3 years, and William knelt down in front of the stone, and Amelia stood beside him, with her hand on his shoulder, and William Hayes talked to his first wife out loud. Unlocked everything, all of it. 10 years of things he'd never said, pouring out at last over a grave. He told her he knew. He told her he forgave her. He told her he understood the wall now, that they'd both built it, that it wasn't his failure or hers, but only two frightened people loving each other badly, out of the same fear. He told her he was glad she'd been coming toward him at the end. He told her he'd loved her truly, even loving a ghost. And then, with Amelia's hand on his shoulder, he told her the last thing. "I found somebody, Catherine. After. I know you'd want to know that. You always did fret over me being alone. She's—" His voice caught. "She's got a way of knocking on locked doors till they open. She unlocked me. The thing I never could do for you, she did for me. And I think maybe you'd have liked her. I think you'd have been glad. I hope you're glad. I hope wherever you are, you can rest now knowing I know the truth, and knowing I'm not alone anymore, and knowing I finally learned the thing you died trying to teach me, that you tell the truth to the people you love even when it's the hardest thing there is, especially then. Rest now, Kath. Rest now. You did reach me. You reached me. It just took a while to arrive." He bowed his head over the grave, and Amelia stood beside him with her hand on his shoulder. And neither of them said anything for a long while, and the only sound was the Montana wind moving through the valley. And when at last William rose and turned and looked at her, at Amelia, at the living woman standing beside him. In the last light, his face was wet, but it was clear, clearer than she had ever seen it. 10 years of guilt and 3 years of grief had finally at that grave been set down. "Marry me," he said. Amelia blinked. "William, we've been planning to, we said the spring." "No." He took both her hands. "Not the arrangement. Not the sensible thing we've been putting off. I mean, Amelia, I've spent 3 years believing I couldn't be trusted to love anybody, and a man rode 2,000 miles today to tell me I was wrong, and I've just now set down a weight I've carried since Catherine died, and I feel for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel free. Free to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Not carefully. Not with one hand holding back in case I turn dangerous. All of it. The whole of it." He gripped her hands hard. "So I'm not asking you to marry me because it's sensible, or because the ranch needs it, or because we planned it. I'm asking because I love you past all reason, and because I finally believe I've got a right to. Marry me, Amelia. Not next spring. Soon. Because I've wasted enough years being afraid, and I don't intend to waste one more." And Amelia Carter, standing beside a dead woman's grave in the Montana twilight, holding the hands of the man who had asked to know her heart, looked up at him and understood that the past had not come to destroy them after all. It had come to set them free. Catherine's secret, kept 10 years and carried 2,000 miles by a grieving brother, had reached across death to unlock the very door Amelia had been knocking on since the day she'd stepped off the train. "Yes," she said. "Yes, soon, as soon as you like." And she went up into his arms there in the last light, and he held her the way he'd held her in the snow at dawn, not like a drowning man anymore, but like a man who had finally, after all these years, made it to shore. They were married 3 weeks later, on a warm Sunday in June, in the small church in town. It was not a grand affair. Amelia had wanted none, and neither had William. But word had gotten round, word always got round in that country. And when they arrived at the little church, Amelia was startled to find it nearly full. The Mullers had come, of course, Greta Muller, in her best dress, weeping before the vows even started. But there were others, too. Ranch families from up and down the valley. The storekeeper who'd sold them their supplies. The old conductor from the depot who'd tipped his hat to her that first day and called her ma'am like she was worth the word. People who had in the months since she'd arrived watched a woman come off a train alone and turn a cold, dead ranch into the finest run spread in the territory, and who had decided quietly, one by one, that whatever the gossip said, they wanted to stand in a church and wish her well. And in the very back pew, arriving late and slipping in without a word, sat Ada Crawford. Amelia saw her from the altar, and for one bad moment her heart clenched. But Ada did not sneer. Ada sat with her hands folded and her eyes down, and when the vows were spoken, and William Hayes promised to love and cherish this woman all the days of his life in a voice that broke clean in half on the word cherish, Amelia saw even Ada Crawford lift a handkerchief to her eyes. Thomas Ashford had stayed for the wedding. He'd meant to leave back in May, meant to give his letters, and ride home, and never trouble them again. But William had gone to him at the inn the morning after the grave, and the two men had talked long into the day, and something had passed between them that neither could quite name. Ashford was the only living tie to Catherine, the only person who'd loved her before William ever had, and William found he could not simply let that ride away. So Ashford had stayed on a week then too, and by the wedding he'd become, strangely wonderfully, something like family. He stood up beside William at the altar, the brother of the first wife standing witness for the second, and Amelia thought there was something in that so tender and so strange that it could only have been arranged by a hand kinder than any of theirs. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and William kissed her, the whole little church rose up cheering. And Amelia Hayes. She was. Amelia Hayes now turned to face them, with her husband's arm around her, and thought of the platform in Cedar Valley, and the whole town that had gathered to watch her leave in disgrace. Look at me now, she thought, not with bitterness, but with a fierce and quiet joy. You threw me away, and look where I landed. Look who stood up in a church to wish me well. You were wrong about me. Every one of you was wrong. She wrote to Sarah that very night. I'm married, Sarah. A whole church full of people, and half of them cried, and my husband broke down on his own vows. The woman nobody wanted got a church full of people wishing her joy. I keep thinking you should have been there. I keep thinking none of it would have happened if you hadn't opened your door on the worst night of my life. Come to Montana, Sarah. I mean it. Come and live near us. I'll not take no. The summer that followed was the happiest of Amelia's life, and she knew it even while she lived it, which is a rare and precious thing. Most people only recognize their golden days in the rear view. But Amelia knew, waking each morning beside her husband in the house that was now truly a home, that she was living the best days she would ever have. The ranch prospered. The plan she'd laid out that first winter came true brick by brick. They broke with the thieving Purvis for good. Amelia had insisted William confront the man directly, and William unlocked. Now had done it, laid the shorted weights out on the counter in front of witnesses, and told Purvis exactly what he was. And the story had gone round the territory, and done more for the Hayes reputation than a year of honest dealing could have. Ranchers who'd never given William the time of day began to send business their way, drawn by the tale of the woman who kept books no man could cheat. By late summer, Broken River Ranch was not just in the black, it was thriving, the talk of the valley, and Amelia Hayes was known up and down the country, not as the woman nobody wanted, but as the sharpest hand with a ledger in the Montana Territory. And William was changed, not all at once, never all at once. But steadily, day by day, the locked-up man came unlocked. He talked now. He talked to her of an evening about things he'd never told a living soul: his boyhood in Ohio, his Mason father, the long, hungry years after they'd come west, the death of his own mother, the loneliness of the empty house. He wept when he needed to and did not apologize for it. He got angry when he needed to and did not swallow it down till it poisoned him. He said, "I love you," awkwardly at first, then easier, then easy as breathing. And he said it not because it was a special occasion, but because he felt it, and had finally learned that a feeling unspoken is a feeling half-wasted. "You did this," he told her one night, the two of them by the fire. "You know that. You cracked me open like your daddy's cracked bricks, and you set me right and mortared me up strong, and here I am, a man who talks. 50 years I couldn't do it, and you did it in a season. How?" "I didn't do it," Amelia said. "You did it. I just kept knocking. You're the one who finally opened the door. You kept knocking when any sensible woman would have given up and gone home. I'm not a sensible woman. Sensible women don't answer newspaper advertisements from strangers in Montana." She smiled at him. "Lucky for you." But happiness, Amelia was learning, does not make a person safe from the world. The world goes on being the world. And that autumn, the world came back for them, not through Catherine's ghost this time, but through the living, and through the one wound Amelia had thought long healed and buried 1,000 miles behind her. It came in a letter. It was postmarked Cedar Valley, Kansas, but the hand was not Sarah's, and Amelia's stomach dropped before she'd even opened it, because a letter from Cedar Valley, not in Sarah's hand, could only mean one thing. It was from Fenwick's boy, the one who'd read Sarah her letters and written down her replies. And it was short, and it was clumsy the way a young man's writing is when he's been handed a task too heavy for him, and it said that Mrs. Sarah Beaumont had taken sick in September with the same fever that had gone round before, and that she had lingered 3 weeks, and that she had passed on the 4th of October, and that she had asked near the end that Amelia be written to, and told just one thing. She said to tell you the boy had written that she died happy on account of you. She said to tell you the door she opened was the best thing she ever did in her life. She said to tell you not to grieve too long because grieving too long is a way of letting the dead steal from the living, and she'd not have you let her steal 1 hour of your happiness? Those were near her last words, Miss Amelia. Beg pardon, Mrs. Hayes. She was proud of you something fierce. She talked of you to anyone that'd listen. The whole town knows you married well and set your husband's ranch to rights. She made sure of it, sure. Amelia read the letter standing up in the kitchen, and then she sat down very slowly on the bench, and she did not cry. That was the strange thing. She did not cry, not right away. She sat holding the letter and felt the enormity of it settle over her. Sarah gone. Sarah, who had opened her door on the worst night of her life and given her soup, and told her that her father had loved her and never once let her feel like a burden. Sarah, who had put the newspaper in front of her, who had told her that a chance comes frightening and with no promises, and that being brave is the hardest thing there is. Sarah, who had mended her mother's quilt and pressed it into her arms and told her some things are stronger where they've been mended. Sarah, who was the reason for all of it, the ranch, the marriage, the church full of people, the whole impossible life, and who had died 1,000 miles away, scrubbing other people's shirts while Amelia lived like a queen in Montana. I never brought her here, Amelia whispered. I kept saying, come to Montana, come live near us, and she kept saying, not yet, not till you're settled, and I let her keep saying, not yet, and now I could have gone and fetched her. I could have put her on a train myself. And I didn't, and now she's dead, in that shack by the creek alone, and I wasn't there. After everything she did, I wasn't there. William found her like that an hour later, sitting at the table, dry-eyed, the letter in her hands, staring at nothing. He read the letter over her shoulder. And then he did the thing she had taught him to do. He did not tell her it was all right, or that Sarah wouldn't have wanted her to grieve, or any of the useless things. He sat down beside her, and he took her hand, and he said, tell me about her. I never met her. Tell me about the woman who saved you, so I can grieve her too. Because I owe her everything, Amelia. She opened the door that sent you to me. I'd not have you carry her alone. Tell me. And that broke it. Amelia turned into her husband and wept as she had not wept since the Kansas mud wept for the good woman who had loved her when no one else would. And William held her and let her and asked her questions and listened and grieved alongside her, a stranger he'd never met, because that stranger had given him the only happiness he'd ever known. It was near midnight when Amelia finally lifted her head spent and said in a voice scraped raw. She said not to grieve too long. She said grieving too long lets the dead steal from the living. That sounds like her. Fierce old thing. Even dying she was giving orders. Then we'll honor it, William said gently. We'll grieve her proper, and then we'll live in a way that'd make her proud because that's what she asked. But Amelia... He hesitated, and she saw him working up to something. The old tell the muscle in the jaw, except now he didn't lock up. Now he pushed through it. I've been thinking. That shack by the creek, where she lived. Somebody's got to see to her things, her burial, all of it. And it don't feel right it being done by that Fenwick boy who barely knew her. He squeezed her hand. Let's go to Kansas. You and me. Let's go bury her proper, and settle her affairs, and... His voice firmed. And while we're there, I think it's high time I met the town that threw my wife in the mud. I think it's high time Cedar Valley, Kansas got a look at what it threw away. Amelia stared at him. You want to go to Cedar Valley? I want to bury the woman who saved you with you beside me and me beside you. And yes. His jaw set. I'll not lie to you since I don't do that anymore. I want that town to see you. I want 'em to see the woman they said was worthless standing in a fine dress on the arm of a man who'd walk through fire for her. Not for spite. Well, he almost smiled. Not only for spite. Because you carried their cruelty 1,000 miles, Amelia. I've seen it in you, the way you flinch sometimes, the way part of you still half believes them. And I think the only way to set that down for good is to go back and stand in front of them, healed and whole and happy, and let them see with their own eyes how wrong they were. I think Sarah'd want that too. I think she'd want you to go home not as the girl who ran off in disgrace, but as the woman who came back a queen. They left for Kansas within the week. The journey east was strange for Amelia. The same rails she'd traveled west on nearly a year before, but everything reversed. Everything changed. She'd gone west alone, terrified, a discarded woman clutching a mended quilt, running toward a stranger and an unknown life. She came east now on the arm of her husband, a woman of standing, going back to bury her benefactor and face down the town that had broken her. She sat by the window and watched the country reel backward past the glass and thought about how far she'd come, not the miles, but the distance inside the distance from the girl in the mud to the woman she was now. "You're quiet," William said. "I'm thinking about the last time I was on this train, going the other way." She turned from the window. "I was so scared, William. I thought I was running to my death maybe, or worse. And a woman on the train, Mrs. Grace, going to Denver, she told me the folks who never risk anything end up with the least. She said I'd made a braver choice than anyone on that platform ever made in their soft lives. And she said it'd turn out better than any of them could imagine." Amelia's eyes were wet. She was right. It turned out better than I could imagine. I wish I could find her and tell her. I wish I could tell all of them, Sarah, Mrs. Grace, my father, my mother. I wish I could line them all up and tell them you were right. The ones who loved me were right, and the ones who threw me away were wrong. And here's the proof. "You'll tell the ones you can," William said. "And the ones you can't, I reckon they know. I reckon Sarah knows right now. And your mother." He took her hand. "You'll tell Cedar Valley, though. That much you can do in the flesh. And I'll be standing right beside you while you do." They arrived in Cedar Valley on a gray afternoon in late October. Amelia had thought she was ready. She was not. The moment she stepped down onto that platform, the same platform where the whole town had gathered to watch her leave, in disgrace, the whole of it came rushing back, and for a moment she was the girl in the mud again, small and ashamed, and she had to grip William's arm to steady herself. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you. Breathe. You're not that girl anymore. That girl couldn't have got off this train. You just did." She straightened. She breathed. And she walked into Cedar Valley on her husband's arm, a woman in a fine traveling dress with her chin held high, and she watched the town notice her. They noticed all right. Word ran ahead of them the way it always did. By the time they reached the boardwalk, faces were appearing in doorways, and the whispers had started, but they were different whispers than the ones she'd left on. "Is that can't be the Carter girl? That's never Amelia Carter. Look at her. Look at the dress. Who's the man? That's her husband. The Montana rancher. Well, I never look at her. Would you just look at her?" And there, coming out of the mercantile with a parcel under her arm, stopping dead on the boardwalk, was Prudence Halliway. The old woman went white. She stared at Amelia as though she were seeing a ghost, and in a way, she was, for the Amelia she'd known was gone, and this woman in her place was someone Prudence Halliway had never met and had certainly never imagined. Amelia stopped. William stopped beside her. And for a long, terrible moment, the two women looked at each other across the boardwalk, and the whole town seemed to hold its breath. Amelia had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times on the train. She'd had cutting things ready, cruel things, all the things she'd wanted to say the day this woman told her she was a burden, and that her dead father had worked himself into the grave keeping her fed. She'd carried those words 1,000 miles and 1,000 back, polishing them. And now, standing here looking at the shrunken, aging woman on the boardwalk, she found she didn't want them anymore. "Mrs. Halliway," Amelia said. "Amelia Mrs." The old woman didn't know what to call her. You look, "I've come to bury Sarah Beaumont," Amelia said quietly. "She died 3 weeks ago. She was the only person in this whole town who showed me kindness when I had nothing. So I've come to see her buried proper and to settle her affairs because there's no one else who will." She paused. "This is my husband, William Hayes. We have a ranch in Montana, a good one. I keep the books." I heard," Prudence Holloway whispered. "We all heard. That it went well for you. And then something happened that Amelia had never once imagined in all her rehearsals. The old woman's face crumpled and her eyes filled, and she said in a voice thick with something that might have been shame, "I owe you an apology, girl. What I said to you that day, in the street, about your father. There's no excuse for it. I've thought on it more than you'd credit this past year. Your father was a good man and he loved you, and I stood in the street and told you lies about him because it made me feel bigger, I suppose, to make you feel small. And that's a wicked thing, a wicked small thing. And I'm sorry for it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted to say it now you're here. I'm sorry, Amelia." The boardwalk was silent. And Amelia Hayes, who had come home with a heart full of just retribution, found that all of it had drained away, and what was left in its place was something quieter and larger and far more like her father, far more like Sarah, far more like the woman she'd become. "My father used to say," Amelia said slowly, "that he never asked what a person weighed before he decided whether they were worth helping. He was the kindest man I ever knew. And I've spent a year learning from Sarah and from my husband and from a good many people that the world's already so full of cruelty that adding to it costs a person their soul, but that mercy is free, and it's the only thing that ever made anybody bigger." She looked at the shrunken old woman. "So, I forgive you, Mrs. Holloway. Not because you've earned it. Because I'd rather be my father's daughter than carry your cruelty 1 mile further. It's heavy. I'm setting it down, right here, right now." Prudence Holloway put her hand over her mouth and wept. And William Hayes, standing beside his wife, looked at her with a kind of awe on his weathered face, because he had come to Cedar Valley half hoping to watch this town get the tongue-lashing it deserved. And instead he'd watched his wife do something far harder and far greater. He'd watched her forgive, and by forgiving prove herself so wholly the town's superior that no cutting word could ever have proven it half so well. They buried Sarah Beaumont 2 days later. Amelia paid for it all, a proper coffin, a proper stone, a proper plot in the churchyard instead of the poor ground where a washerwoman would ordinarily have been laid. And she was startled on the day of the burial to find that she was not the only mourner. Word had gone round, word always went round, that the Carter girl had come home a wealthy woman to bury the washerwoman who'd taken her in, and something in that story had reached into the town's conscience, and folks came. Not many at first, but some, and then more. Neighbors who'd let Sarah scrub their shirts for pennies and never thought twice, standing now at her graveside with their hats in their hands, moved by a story of loyalty and kindness that shamed them for how little of either they'd ever shown. Amelia spoke over the grave. She hadn't meant to. She'd meant only to stand there. But the words came. "Sarah Beaumont was the richest woman I ever knew," Amelia said to the gathered mourners. "She didn't have 2 coins to rub together. She scrubbed your shirts for pennies and lived in a shack by the creek, and half of you looked down on her the same as you looked down on me. But she was rich in the only things that matter. She was rich in courage. She was rich in kindness. And when a girl came to her door on the worst night of her life, thrown out, and told she was worthless, Sarah Beaumont opened that door without one moment's hesitation and gave what little she had. She didn't ask what I weighed. She didn't ask what I could offer. She just opened the door." Amelia's voice broke. "Everything I have, my husband, my home, my whole life grew from that one open door. And I'll spend the rest of my days trying to be worth it. Trying to open doors for others the way she opened one for me. That's the only monument she'd have wanted. Not this stone. That. Rest now, Sarah. You did more good with nothing than most folks do with everything. I'll not forget it. I'll not ever forget it." There was not a dry eye in the churchyard, and in the back of the small crowd, Amelia saw a familiar face. Betsy Patterson older now by a year, harder looking, and Amelia remembered the girl's cruel words on the day she'd left. "Ain't nobody in Cedar Valley gonna take you in, not looking like that." And she remembered her own answer. "One day, life is going to knock you flat. I pray somebody kinder than this town shows up to lift you back up." After the burial, Betsy approached her, hesitant, ashamed. "Mrs. Hayes," the girl said, "you won't remember, but the day you left I said an awful thing to you, on the platform." She twisted her hands. "And you said one day life'd knock me flat, and you hoped somebody kinder'd lift me up." Her eyes filled. "Well, it did. Knock me flat. I married a man who it doesn't matter. It went bad. And I've been thinking on what you said ever since, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. And to ask how'd you do it? How'd you stop letting them make you feel small? Because I can't seem to. I can't seem to stop." And Amelia Hayes looked at this girl who'd once been cruel to her and was now broken exactly as she'd predicted. And she felt no triumph in it, only a deep and weary tenderness, the kind Sarah would have felt, the kind her father would have felt. "Come here," she said, and drew the girl aside and told her gently, honestly, the way Sarah had once told her everything she'd learned. That your worth is not for other people to decide. That it's yours and always was. That the folks who never risk anything end up with the least. That being brave is the hardest thing there is, and the only thing that ever changes anything. That grief and cruelty, and being cast out, are not the end of a story, only the hard middle of it, if you've got the courage to keep turning the pages. Somebody told me all that once," Amelia finished. "A woman we buried today, and it saved my life. So now I'm telling you, Betsy Patterson, and maybe someday you'll tell somebody else, and that's how Sarah Beaumont keeps living long after the stone's worn smooth. You pass it on. That's all. You just pass it on." She left Betsy weeping in the churchyard, but it was a different weeping than despair, and both of them knew it. They stayed in Cedar Valley a week, settling Sarah's small affairs. And on the last day before they took the train back west, Amelia went alone to two graves. First to her father's, where a year ago she had knelt in fresh-turned earth and told him they'd taken the house. The mound was grassed over now, healed the way all graves eventually heal. She knelt in front of the plain wooden cross. "Well, Papa," she said, "I came back, not the way I left." She smiled through her tears. "You always said I was smart. You said I could do sums faster than any man at the bank, and you were right, and it turned out somebody wanted it after all. A good man, the best man I've known since you. You'd like him, Papa. He's quiet like you were and honest, and he came to love me for exactly the things you always said were worth loving. He defends me. He talks to me. He held me all night in a snowstorm and told me I stayed when nobody ever stayed." Her voice broke. "You told me my worth wasn't for other people to decide, and I didn't believe you that day in the mud. But I believe you now. I believe you now, Papa. It just took a while to arrive." Then she went to Sarah's fresh grave, the new stone pale and clean. She knelt there too, and she stayed a long while, and she did not say much because there was not much left to say that hadn't been said over the coffin. But at the end, she reached out and laid her hand flat on the cold stone, the way she'd once laid it flat over William's hammering heart, and she whispered, "You opened the door. It was the best thing you ever did, you said. And it was Sarah. For me, it was the whole world." She pressed her palm to the stone. "I'll open doors now, as many as I can, for as long as I live. That's my promise to you. Rest now." William was waiting for her at the churchyard gate when she rose and came back to him. He didn't ask what she'd said. He just opened his arms and she walked into them, and he held her there in the gray Kansas morning, and after a while he said quietly, "You ready to go home?" And Amelia Hayes, who had come to this town, a discarded girl, and was leaving it a whole and healed woman, who had buried the one who saved her, and forgiven the ones who broke her, who had passed on Sarah's gift to a broken girl, and made her peace with her father's bones, and set down at last every ounce of cruelty she'd carried 1,000 miles. Amelia Hayes looked up at her husband and said the truest thing she knew, "I am. Take me home, William. I've said my goodbyes. There's nothing left for me here but the graves, and the graves I'll carry with me wherever I go." She took his arm. Home. Montana. Let's go home. And they walked out of the churchyard together and left Cedar Valley behind them for the last time. And Amelia did not look back, not because it hurt to, but because she no longer needed to. The town had no more power over her. She'd come back and faced it whole, and found it small and forgiven it anyway, and in the forgiving had finally fully set herself free. On the train west somewhere in the long empty stretch between Kansas and the mountains, William reached into his coat and drew out something wrapped in cloth and put it in her lap. "I had this made," he said gruffly, "in town, while you were settling Sarah's affairs. I wasn't sure whether to, but I think she'd have liked it, and I think you should have it." Amelia unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small carved wooden plaque, the kind a person might hang by a door, and on it in careful letters was carved a single line. "The door is always open." Amelia looked up at her husband, unable to speak. "For our house," William said, "by the front door. So that anybody who comes to Broken River Ranch on the worst night of their life thrown out and told they're worthless anybody like you were, they'll see it and they'll know. The door is always open, the way Sarah's was, the way ours'll be." He cleared his throat. "It seemed like the right way to honor her. And you. And I don't know. It seemed right." And Amelia Hayes held the little plaque to her chest there on the train, carrying her home to Montana, and understood that the circle had closed, that the open door which had saved her life would now become the guiding principle of the life she'd been given. That Sarah Beaumont's one great act of mercy would be multiplied out across all the years to come, in a house on a hard and beautiful stretch of land, where the door would always, always be open. "It's perfect," she whispered. "William, it's perfect. It's the most perfect thing anyone's ever given me." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and the train carried them west home toward the mountains and the ranch, and all the years still waiting to be lived, two broken people who'd been set beside each other and mortared up strong. Carrying between them the memory of everyone who'd ever opened a door, and the promise to keep every door they owned open for good. The little plaque hung by the front door of Broken River Ranch before the week was out. William nailed it up himself that first morning home, while Amelia stood on the porch and watched. And when it was done, the two of them stepped back and looked at it. The door is always open, and neither of them said anything, because some things are too full for words. Then Amelia took her husband's hand, and they went inside, and the life they'd fought so hard for closed around them again, like something warm. But Amelia had made a promise at Sarah's grave, and she was not a woman who made promises idly. She'd said she would open doors. She had not said it as a pretty sentiment to comfort a dying woman's memory. She'd meant it as a plan, and within a month of coming home, she began to make it real. It started with a girl. Her name was Ruth, and she came up the road on foot on a cold November evening, half-starved, carrying a bundle and a baby, and she stopped at the gate of Broken River Ranch because she'd heard in town that the Hayes place would turn no one away. She was 17. The baby was 4 months old. The man who'd fathered it had promised to marry her and then vanished when her belly grew round and her own family had thrown her out for the shame of it. And she'd been walking and begging for weeks, and she'd heard folks always talked, that there was a ranch out past the Mueller place where the woman had once been thrown out herself and might understand. Amelia found her at the gate, shaking too proud and too frightened to knock. And Amelia Hayes looked at this girl thrown out, told she was worthless, carrying everything she owned in a bundle, standing at a gate, not daring to hope, and she saw herself. She saw the Kansas mud. She saw Sarah's door opening on the worst night of her life. "Come inside," Amelia said before the girl could say a word. "There's soup on the stove. It's not much, but it's hot. And there's a warm bed, and it's yours as long as you need it. And I'll not hear one word about payment or shame or what you've done or haven't done. You come inside now out of the cold, you and the baby both. The door's open. See?" She pointed to the plaque. "It says so right there. The door is always open. Come in." Ruth stayed the winter, and in the staying, Amelia understood the true shape of the promise she'd made, that opening a door was not a single act of charity, but the beginning of a whole life's work. Because Ruth, once fed and warm and safe, once told 100 times over that her worth was not for the man who'd abandoned her or the family who'd cast her out to decide began to heal the way Amelia had healed. She was clever, that girl, once the fear was scrubbed off her. Amelia taught her letters and sums by the same lamp William had learned the books by. And by spring, Ruth was keeping half the ranch's accounts herself, and the baby was fat and laughing. And the girl who'd stood shaking at the gate stood straight now, and looked people in the eye, and had begun tentatively to believe she might have a future after all. "You saved her," William said one night, watching Ruth rock the baby by the fire. "Same as Sarah saved you." "I didn't save her," Amelia said. "I just opened the door. She did the rest. They always do the rest. That's the thing folks never understand about mercy. You're not saving anybody. You're just giving them the chance to save themselves. That's all a door is. A chance." She leaned against him. "Sarah knew that. She never once acted like she was rescuing me. She just made soup and got out of the way and let me become who I already was, underneath all the cruelty they'd piled on." Ruth was the first. She was not the last. Word spread the way. Word always spreads in that country that Broken River Ranch was a place that would take a person in. Not a poorhouse. Not a charity. Something better and stranger than either. A place where a soul who'd been thrown away could come and be fed, and be safe, and be told by a woman who knew exactly what it was to be discarded, that they were worth something after all. Over the years they came the widows and the orphans, the girls in trouble, the men broken by drink or grief or bad luck, the ones the world had looked at and found wanting. Some stayed a night, some stayed a season. A few stayed for good and became part of the strange patched-together family that grew up around the ranch, like a wall built of cracked bricks, set careful mortared right and stronger for the cracks. And through it all, at the center of it, Amelia and William. The marriage that had begun as an arrangement between two frightened strangers became, over the years, the deepest thing either of them had ever known. William never fully lost his silences. Amelia never expected him to. A man doesn't become someone else. He only becomes more fully himself, but he learned to move through them now instead of hiding in them. Learned to say, "Give me a minute, there's a thing I want to say," and then to actually say it every time, no matter how hard. And Amelia, who had come to Montana, half believing the cruel voices that said she was worth only what a desperate man would take, came over the years to believe her mother's voice instead, and her father's and Sarah's and William's, the voices that had always told her the truth. Your worth is yours. It always was. They never had children of their own. It was a grief quietly for both of them. There were tears over it in the early years, private ones. But Amelia came to understand something about it that turned the grief into something else. "I think," she told William one night, "that maybe it was meant this way. Maybe if we'd had our own, we'd have poured everything into them and closed the door to all the others. And instead, look at this house, William. Look how full it is. We've got more children than any two people in the territory. They just came to us grown or half-grown or broken, and we got to help finish raising them. Ruth's boy calls me grandmother. Did you know that he doesn't know any different? To him, I'm just grandmother, and this is just home, and that's William. That's exactly what I'd have wanted if I'd been able to choose. A house too full of the once thrown away to ever be lonely again." William pulled her close. "You turned the thing that was supposed to be your curse into your whole gift," he said. "You know that the world threw you away for being different, for being too big, for not fitting what they wanted. And you took all that pain and you built this, a place for everyone else the world throws away. There's a kind of justice in it so deep I can't hardly see the bottom." "It's not justice," Amelia said softly. "It's just passing it on. Sarah gave to me. I give to them. They'll give to somebody else. That's not justice, William. That's just what love looks like when it keeps moving. When you don't let it stop with you." The years passed, the way years do, quick and then quicker. The ranch grew into one of the finest in the Montana Territory, exactly as Amelia had promised that first winter over the ledgers, and then finer than she'd promised until the Hayes name meant something up and down the country, and not for the size of the herd, but for the character of the two people who ran it. Ranchers sent their sons to William to learn how a man ought to run a spread honest. Women in trouble sent word to Amelia quietly through the network of the once helped, and the door stayed open always, and the soup stayed hot. Thomas Ashford came back to visit near every year, and became in truth the family he'd only resembled at the wedding Uncle Thomas, to the whole patched-together household. The man who'd once ridden 2,000 miles to set a grieving widower free, and had somehow in the doing freed himself from the loneliness of being the only one left who remembered his sister. He and William would sit on the porch of an evening and talk of Catherine easily now without pain. Two men who'd loved the same complicated woman, and made their peace with her and with each other. And Amelia would watch them from the kitchen window, and think that this too was a kind of door opened, that even the dead could be forgiven and grieved right, and set free if you had the courage to face the truth of them. Ada Crawford of all people became a friend. It had begun at the wedding, with the handkerchief and the tears, and it had grown slowly over the years, the way the hardest friendships sometimes do, the kind between two people who started as enemies and had to earn their way to something else. Ada, it turned out, had been cruel to Amelia that first day in the mercantile, for reasons that had nothing to do with Amelia at all. She'd been a lonely, bitter woman, married, badly envious of anyone who seemed to have found the thing she'd been denied, and her cruelty had been the sound of her own unhappiness spilling over. Amelia understood that now. She'd learned it from Prudence Holloway back in Kansas. Cruelty is almost always the sound of someone's own pain turned outward, aimed at whoever's nearest. And the only thing that ever stops it is somebody refusing to aim it back. So Amelia hadn't aimed it back. She'd let Ada earn her way to friendship over years, and by the end, the two women were thick as thieves, and Ada Crawford was one of the fiercest defenders of the Hayes place and its open door, and had helped more thrown-away souls back onto their feet than anyone in the county, save Amelia herself. "You made me useful," Ada told her once gruffly, the way she said anything that mattered. "I was a wasted, bitter old thing, and you didn't even fight me that day in the mercantile. Your husband did, but you just looked at me like you were sorry for me. And it burned worse than any cutting word could have, because it was true. I was pitiful, and you saw it. And then you forgave it. Took me years to forgive myself for what you forgave in an afternoon." She'd shaken her head. "You're a strange woman, Amelia Hayes. The strangest I ever knew. And the best." Amelia wrote it all down. That was Ruth's idea. In the later years, Ruth, grown now into a woman herself, married well with children of her own, but never far from the ranch that had saved her. "You ought to write it down," she told Amelia. "All of it. How you came here. Sarah and the door, and the storm, and Catherine's brother, and going back to Kansas, and all of us that came after. Somebody ought to write it down so it doesn't get lost when—" She'd stopped, not wanting to say it. "So it doesn't get lost." So Amelia wrote it down. Evenings by the lamp in a leather book in the strong, clear hand her father had taught her. She wrote the whole of it, from the mud in Kansas, to the church full of mourners at Sarah's grave, to the plaque by the door, to all the souls who'd come up the road since. And she found in the writing that she was not writing it for herself, and not even for Ruth or the others, but for whoever came after, for some frightened, thrown-away person years hence, who might read it and understand that their worth was not for the world to decide, that the hard middle of a story is not its end, that one open door can change everything. She titled the book when it was done with a single line, the same line that hung by the front door. "The door is always open." William read it when she'd finished. It took him 3 evenings, and when he closed it, he sat a long while without speaking, and then he said in the rough, unlocked voice that still after all these years could break her heart, "You know what I keep thinkin' readin' this? I keep thinkin' about the day your letter came. The 40th letter. 39 women told me they were beautiful and cheerful and perfect, and one woman told me the truth, that she couldn't cook, and she was scared, and she wasn't small, and she was tired of being told what she was worth by people who never bothered to know her." He set his hand on the book. "I near didn't answer it, Amelia. Did you know that I read it, and it scared me all that honesty, and I set it down and told myself I'd send for one of the easy ones, one of the ones who told me what I wanted to hear. I set your letter aside for 2 whole days." His voice thickened. "And then I picked it up again, and I read it a 3rd time. And something in me said this one. This is the one who'll tell you the truth even when it's hard. This is the one worth answering. And I answered it. And that one choice, that one time I picked up the scary letter instead of the easy one, that's the whole of my life right there. Everything I am. Everything this house is. All of it hung on that one moment, and I near got it wrong. But you didn't get it wrong, Amelia said softly. No, I didn't. He took her hand. I got the one thing in my whole life exactly right. And I've thanked God for it every day since in my own quiet way, whether I said it out loud or not. They grew old together at Broken River Ranch. It was a good old age, the kind that most people never get surrounded by the family they'd built out of the once forsaken, respected, up and down the territory, easy with each other in the way of two people who'd spent a lifetime learning each other by heart. William's beard went from gray to white. Amelia's dark hair silvered. The ranch passed in time into the hands of Ruth's eldest, who'd grown up in it and loved it, and kept the door open exactly as they'd taught him. And the old couple slowed, and sat more on the porch, and watched the life they'd made go on around them, full and warm and loud, with children who'd never once known a day of being thrown away. Near the end, William asked her a question. They were on the porch, the two of them, an evening in their last summer together. He was frail by then, and so was she, and they both knew without saying that they were near the close of it. And he took her hand, the way he'd taken it 10,000 times, and he said, "Amelia, I asked you a question once long ago, that first day or near it. Do you remember I asked you, did you come here because you had nowhere else to go, or because you truly chose this life?" "I remember," she said. "I told you I came because I was tired of letting other people decide what my life was worth." "You did." He smiled, the old smile gone soft with age. "And it was the truest thing anybody ever said to me. But I got a different question now. A last one, I think." He turned to look at her. "If you had it all to do again, knowing everything, the cruelty and the mud and the fear, the storm, Catherine's letters and all that hurt, losing Sarah, all of it. Every hard thing, if you had every choice in the world and you knew the whole of what it had cost, would you still choose it? Would you still get on that train? Would you still choose me?" And Amelia Hayes looked at the man she'd chosen out of a newspaper column 40 years before, the stranger who'd asked to know her heart, the locked-up man she'd knocked open one brick at a time, the husband who'd faced down a town for her and held her through a killing storm and set her free at a dead woman's grave, and hung a plaque by their door that had changed 100 lives, and she did not hesitate. Not for a heartbeat, not for the length of a breath. "In every world there is," she said. "In every life I could ever be given, knowing every hard thing, every hurt, every cost, I'd choose it all again. And I'd choose you first of all, and I'd get on that train again tomorrow and ride 1,000 miles to a stranger, just for the chance of ending up right here on this porch holding your hand. You were never a risk I took, William Hayes. You were the reward for every hard thing that came before you. I'd choose you 1,000 times. I'd choose you always. There has never been a moment from the day your letter came to this one that I didn't choose you with my whole heart." William Hayes wept, then easily, openly, the way she'd taught him, the way he'd never once been able to do before she came. And he lifted her old hand to his lips and kissed it, and he said, "Then it was all worth it, every bit of it, because I got to be the thing you chose." They sat on the porch until the light was gone, two old people holding hands, and they did not need to say anything more. William passed first that winter quietly in his sleep, with Amelia's hand in his, and she was not there when he woke to whatever came next, but she'd been there every night of the 40 years before it, and she took what comfort she could in that. She grieved him the way she'd taught him to grieve, openly, fully, without swallowing it down, and the great patched-together family gathered around her and held her up, all the once thrown-away souls she'd caught and healed over the years, come now to catch and heal her in her turn. That was the thing about opening doors, she understood at last. Do it long enough, and when your own dark night comes, you find you're surrounded by everyone whose door you ever opened, and they will not let you fall. Amelia lived 2 years more. She spent them well. She kept writing in the leather book. She told the old stories to the youngest children, the ones too young to have known William, so that they'd know him too. She sat on the porch where they'd asked each other the last question, and she was not lonely. Not truly, because a house that full is never lonely. And because she carried William with her the way she carried all her graves. Her father, her mother, Sarah, Catherine, and now her husband, not as weights, but as company. The beloved dead walking beside her wherever she went. And when her own time came in her sleep on a spring night with the window open to the mountains, she went easy, and she went unafraid because she had done the thing she'd set out to do. She had refused to let the world decide what she was worth. She had chosen her own life with her own two hands. She had loved and been loved fully truly for exactly who she was. And she had spent 40 years turning the cruelty that was meant to destroy her into a door that had saved 100 souls, and would go on saving them long after she was gone. They buried her beside William on a rise overlooking the ranch where the two of them could keep watch over the life they'd built. And Ruth grown gray herself. Now the girl who'd once stood shaking at the gate. Ruth saw to it that the plaque came down off the front door of the old house, and was set instead into the headstone they shared, carved deep into the stone, so the weather would never wear it away. So that anyone who came to pay respects for 100 years would read the line that had been the whole meaning of both their lives. The door is always open. The woman the whole world had thrown away had become the reason 100 thrown-away souls found their way home. The cruel town in Kansas that had watched her go in disgrace was forgotten. No one remembered Prudence Holloway or Nathaniel Prescott or the sneering faces on the platform. But everyone in that Montana country for generations knew the story of Amelia Hayes, the big, plain, brilliant woman who'd answered a stranger's advertisement with nothing but honesty and courage, and built out of one open door a legacy that outlived them all. She had been right that day at her father's grave when she'd whispered that her worth was hers and always had been. She had been right on the train, telling Mrs. Grace she was running toward something and not away. She had been right to knock on William's locked door and refuse to stop. She had been right to forgive the town that broke her and to open her own door to everyone the world broke after. She had been right about all of it, and in the end, the question that had changed everything was never really the Cowboys, though he'd asked it first and asked it last. The question that changed everything was the one Amelia Carter had answered with her whole life, every single day, from the Kansas mud to the Montana grave, the question of what a person is truly worth and who gets to decide it. She decided, she always had, and her answer stands carved in stone on a Montana hillside to this day for anyone with the courage to read it and the wisdom to believe it, that no one, no town, no cruelty, no cast-out night, no voice that ever told you you were nothing. No one on this earth gets to decide your worth but you. Amelia Hayes proved it with her life. The door she left open is open still, and it always will be.